Now there's my poor old bad foot. Oh dear. Ow. It'll get better. But right now, unfortunately, I can't do much in terms of walking. But I've had this sort of thing has happened to me before, you know, being an ex-hospital porter and all that, and I got over it then. I should get over it again. Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order, welcome to Utopian TV. This is a video I'm making specially for the attendees at the Conscious Tribal Gathering 2017. I was meant to be with you this weekend. I'm afraid I can't because of what you've just seen, my bad foot. I was actually just, I didn't have any work yesterday, but I was like, I was walking along just to meet somebody, just walking along the road, and suddenly, my ankle started hurting. It just became very painful, and it's got worse. I went off to the High Wycombe Paranormal group, and it got worse over the course of the evening. And I had a bit of a disturbed night because of the pain whenever especially when I moved it, but even when I wasn't, it was aching. And I went to the hospital this morning. I went up to my old hospital, the John Radcliffe, and had it checked over. I waited in the waiting room for a while, had it x-rayed. The doctor came and fiddled with my foot for a while, and diagnosed a sprained ankle. He said I've got to keep it, I've got to rest it, but at the same time I've got to keep moving it so it doesn't seize up. But I'm not able, unfortunately, to come to the Conscious Tribal Gathering, and I'm very sorry about that because I had everything prepared. I was all ready to go. I was looking forward to it. A lot of my friends were going. People, you know, old friends and new friends, people I met, people like Debbie and Malcolm, and all these people I met last year. You were all going. I was looking forward to seeing you. The weather forecast looked quite good, and I had my speech prepared, and now I can't go, and I'm really sorry about that. I want to apologise to Gary, the organiser, and I want to apologise to everyone who's coming along expecting to see my speech and meet me and talk to me and see my speech. Deepest apologies. I don't know how it happened. It wasn't an accident. It just happened. It just came on. It just came on as I was walking along, and I don't know how I did it. But what I am going to do, I've made this video for you specifically, but for all my viewers, but specifically for you guys. What I want to do is just give you my talk on camera, which you can watch. Maybe Gary, maybe you can put this on a screen. Maybe you can display this on a screen if you can get a connection and get YouTube at the campsite at Glendoverduy. Maybe you can put this up on the screen so that people can watch it, and it's almost as good as me being there, isn't it? Or people just or just let people know, and then they can watch it in their own time on their own devices. I'd appreciate that. Like I said, this is the next best thing for me, being there live, I guess. So I'm going to give you my talk: energy politics and UFOs. And as you know, if you read the blurb, my name is Ben Emlyn Jones, and this is my website here. Panel Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. I'll just zoom in a little bit, just so you can see that. There we are. Let's get rid of that. Whoops, sorry. I'll just get rid of that. There we got that. Just so you can see that. That's my website, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, which I've been running now for over 10 years. So I'm very proud of it. It's got there's a lot on there. There's the main site, which is basically just a kind of I mean, I do put articles up on there, but it's become a bit something of a portal actually, just for the other sites, which is a news site, Utopian TV, which you're watching now, and my fiction and things like that, and the forum and other things. So quite an extensive multimedia experience you'll find on there. This here is me, the portering Buddha. I'll just zoom in a bit. There we go. Well, not too much. This is what you would have seen if you'd come and found me a few years ago. I used to be a hospital porter at the John Radcliffe Hospital, the same place I was at this morning, getting my legs seen to. I saw a couple of people who recognised me actually. But in 2012, in fact just after New Year 2012, I actually was discharged from the NHS hospital porting service. How and why is a very long story, but I basically think it's kind of suspicious, really. that's I've done a whole talk on that anyway. But what we're going to talk about today are several things. UFOs, right? Energy politics and UFOs. How do those things meld together? How do they gel? How do they connect? Well, I shall endeavour to explain that over the course of this talk. There is a UFO, a classic flying saucer type UFO, and so you have there the disc-shaped object. These are the one of the ones of the types most commonly seen, which is where you get the sort of generic flying saucer from. Excuse me, I've just got a bit of a. This is dragon's urine, by the way. Very, very effective and refreshing drink. This is another type of UFO. This is the flying triangle, very, very commonly seen apparition. You see it's very often a black or very dark blue triangle, usually equilateral triangle with lights at the corner or in the middle. In 1990 there was a massive wave of sightings over Belgium, and this is one of the photographs taken during that flight, during that flap in 1990. This is a spherical, I'm going to zoom in a bit. This is a spherical UFO seen by Robert Taylor in 1979. This thing he didn't just see it, this thing grabbed him and ripped his trousers. And I've seen those trousers. I've even put my fingers through the holes made by the UFO. A guy called Malcolm Robinson now owns those trousers, and I have, I've actually seen, he's actually showed them to me. Pretty amazing, that. Now this is an artist's depiction of the Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980, where a tetrahedral UFO, a tetrahedron is a pyramid-shaped object with a triangular base. In other words, it's a four-sided object made of four equilateral triangles, whereas opposed to a conventional pyramid which has a square base. It had lights on it, it had strange writings, strange markings on it. According to one of the witnesses, Larry Warren, strange creatures came out of it. But it's very, very interesting that these things appear. They very often appear in nuclear bases. I've taken a photograph of, I was just hiking in Scotland, and I took a photograph once, and there was this, just happened to be a nuclear base in the area, and I captured a disc-shaped object in that camera. I've done a whole video on that. It's on my catalogue. Now this is the flying chevron with lights on. This is another common thing. These tend to be very big. I don't know how much of that you can see, but these tend to be very. There's one seen in 1997 over the city of Phoenix in Arizona. That's a big city of 1 million people, and this chevron-shaped craft flew over very low over that city, and thousands of people saw it. There was a cover-up. They said it was flares, but the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, has now admitted that there was a cover-up, and he took part in the cover-up. He didn't want mass public panic, so he pretended it wasn't really UFOs. But it makes you wonder, though, if Governor Symington confessed, how many other people have taken part in cover-ups and have not confessed? That's the question. And it seems here that, I'll have to zoom that in a bit. This is a headline here from the old Current Bun, that bastion of quality British journalism. It seems that weather balloons are now being fitted with rhubars. UFO hits wind turbine. Yeah, that was in Lincolnshire a couple of years ago, in an area which has become known as the Lincolnshire Triangle. Richard D. Hall has investigated this, where all kinds of strange things have happened. Multiple sightings, sheep going missing, stuff like that. Oh, loads. And you see here this the missing blade riddle. It's very odd, that, isn't it? Of course, these artefacts that appear, sure, I know some of them are explicable. Some of them may be a strange kind of bird, some of them might be a plane, some of them might be like an unusual aircraft that you're not familiar with, some might be a kite or something like that. A UFO just simply stands for unidentified flying objects. Basically any object, let me zoom in again, any object you see in the sky which you can't identify is an unidentified flying object by definition. Not all unidentified flying objects are unidentifiable. In other words, if you saw it up close and it wasn't flying in the sky, you'd probably recognise it. So I think probably the majority of reported UFO sightings come under that category. But not all of them do. Some of them, I believe, are artifacts of an extraterrestrial civilization. And when I say extraterrestrial, this could not necessarily mean other planets. It could refer to other dimensions or times or spaces and things like that. It's a complicated business. It may be a combination of all of those things. But it seems that a lot of these objects, these extraterrestrial artifacts, appear to be some. When they're described and they're identified, they're usually described as some kind of vehicle for biological entities. And so they are spacecraft. They're often called spacecraft. And this is one of the most common types of biological entity. It's known as the grey, which you often see. This is a generic alien you often see in science fiction. There's also these guys. These are the Nordics. Now these are unusual because they're very human looking. In fact, they tend to have bright blue eyes and golden blonde hair. But really, if they're dressed in normal clothes and walk down the street, you probably wouldn't give them. You may give them a second look, but you wouldn't think they were alien. You just think they were rather unusual looking humans. They tend to have features that are human, but tend to be quite exaggerated. Like of course, many people have blue eyes, but the eyes of these creatures are very, very deep, dark blue, very, very intense blue, and a lot of people have blonde hair, but very often it's streaked with something else. But the blonde hair of these creatures is extremely exaggerated blonde, and they often have very, very prominent cheekbones and sharp chins and things like that. So they're kind of like excessively exaggerated humans. But they're very commonly seen. They're not just a product of overactive imaginations or 1960s cults and things like that. They are quite commonly seen. This is the tall grey. Now this is a picture of an illustration based on a description by someone called Whitley Strieber, who is an author who's written many books, and he had strange encounters. He wrote lots of other kinds of books, horror stories and things like that. Then he started writing UFO books because he had an encounter with a creature that looked like this, and it's very much a classic UFO encounter. Very, very interesting chap indeed. Reptilians. Now, this reptilian here, I don't need to zoom in. I think you can see that. This is a humanoid reptilian. Now, these creatures tend to be associated with unpleasant UFO experiences. There's the great Australian researcher Mary Rodwell has written several books, and she's talked a lot about creatures like this, encounters with all kinds of different species of aliens. There's a virtual taxonomy of these alien creatures now. There are literally hundreds of different species have been identified, and amazingly, people all over the world will have various encounters with creatures, with different kinds of creatures that very often are the same type. People who don't know each other and live in very, very disparate areas of the world. People who have very, very different racial and cultural backgrounds will still have encounters with the same creatures. The reptilian humanoid is another common one. They're very often described as very tall. They're humanoid, but they are scaly, covered in scales. They have these unusual faces. So they're kind of like a cross between a lizard and a human. And they are often seen on extraterrestrial spacecraft. They're often supposedly the creatures that actually live among us, disguised as humans, according to David Icke and many other people. This is a very, very unusual idea, but it is one I take seriously. I honestly do. This is a mantid being. Now this is a mantid. This looks a bit like a praying mantis. It's like an insectoid creature. I don't know how much of that you can see. Can you see it properly? I hope so. Yeah, I think you can. Yeah. And the mantid being is this creature that it's often very tall, and despite its fearsome appearance, it's often a very, very benevolent, very, very kind creature. And there's actually a well-known figure, a British politician called Simon Parkes, who has had encounters with these beings, and to the point even where he's had a sexual relationship with one of the female of the species. He calls it his alien wife, which is a bit tricky because he has a human wife in our world, and to be a fly on the wall. But basically, Simon's a good guy. He's made a laughing stock in the British media, so very, very unfairly. But these mantids creatures, but they get weirder. I mean, these creatures, there's no end to the weirdness and wonder and craziness you see in the various kinds of. God knows what the hell is that? Oh my goodness me! That is Nick Pope, and I've got no idea what planet he comes from. Nick Pope, bless his heart, bless his cotton socks. This is an artist's impression, or if you can call it that, because it was done by me, of my own encounter. I was walking. This happened in late December 2008, just after Christmas. I was walking on my way to work at the hospital, and I came about midday, and I came across this white object in the sky. It was quite distant, apparent size about a quarter of the size of the full moon. Spherical, circular or spherical, and white. And at one point it went behind a cloud, and when the cloud passed over, it had gone. It must have been quite some size, because it was like at about a 40-degree elevation, and it went behind the clouds. It must have been some distance away, which means it must have been of some size, considerable size. There was a strong wind blowing that day, and this thing was motionless. It was not a balloon. I did check out for any balloon activities in the area, and there were none. Very, very odd indeed. So it remains unsolved to this day. The Bufog website has details of my encounter. Then we're going to talk about energy. Energy. What is energy? I hope you've got plenty of it this evening. I really do. Energy is an undefined factor of the universe that causes change. That's basically how it's best defined. If you ask Stephen Hawking, he'll go, I don't know. If you ask Professor Brian Cox, he'll go, I don't know. I mean, I don't like saying that, but I'm so wonderful. I've got these shiny white teeth, and I'm so handsome. But I don't know really. No one can honestly say they know what energy is. But we observe its effects. Everything that happens in the world is a result of effects. For example, my energy is being generated continuously by everything around me. The electricity which this camera is using, of course, but also within my own body. Right now, my body is converting a massive amount of hydrocarbons into energy and releasing waste products of carbon dioxide. This is a process known as combustion, and it's the same process that you find in all artificially generated, or most artificially generated energy production. It's like I can like put my arm in the air like that. You see, I can hold my arm like that, and I'm like, right now the muscles of my arm are they're burning energy, right? They're burning energy to hold my arm in that position, and the energy is coming in there from the combustion, from the food I eat and the oxygen I'm breathing in. A chemical reaction is taking place in my muscles that allowed me to overcome the force of gravity to hold my arm in this position like that. And I shouldn't really do that, should I? That's a wrong meeting. That's for later. Yeah. If someone got a screenshot of that, just imagine it. Yeah, I'd be denounced as an evil fascist. Yeah. So basically, that's what energy is. Now, I hope you can see that. I don't need to zoom that in, do I? That's an oil rig in the North Sea. Now, what you see there is energy being extracted from the earth in the form of fossil fuels. Or, well, it's a kind of side issue. Not everyone is convinced that oil is a fossil fuel. Maybe I'll say a bit more about that later, but it's just assume it is a fossil fuel as is conventionally known about. Oil it's found underneath the earth mostly, usually very deep, and it has to be drilled out by various methods. In the case of the North Sea oil, the oil is underneath the seabed, and so it has to be extracted from the sea itself, from these oil rigs, which is not easy to do, but they've succeeded in it. And this oil is being dug up. Now you see, there's other forms of fossil fuel. There's coal and gas and things like that, and so there's some oil rigs that bring up gas too. But this fossil fuel it's often been described as the world's biggest industry, but it's not. It is the world's industry. It is the lifeblood and the lubricant of civilization, as well as the fuel. And the politics connected to that energy is very, very important indeed. And this talk is going to be basically around giving you an understanding of the political issues associated with energy. The oil that's brought up from beneath the North Sea and from anywhere else, and this is a nodding donkey. It's an oil extraction device which you use on land. The oil that's brought up is refined. It's turned into various different types, whether it's petrol for cars, kerosene for aircraft, various other kinds of things. It's used but when it's actually processed and it's actually put into engines and into generators and things like that, the process by which the energy is extracted is exactly the same as what goes on inside my body: combustion. The combustion generates energy. It generates my body's warm because it generates heat, and the energy can then be used. You put petrol in your car. The energy from the petrol is extracted via the combustion, which is the job of the engine. The engine of your car carries out the combustion process, which is basically a device for turning petroleum energy into usable energy. That's the energy stored in the petroleum. Petroleum, according to conventional, the mainstream idea, petroleum is essentially the remains of dead creatures, plants and animals that existed 1 billion or more years ago. Although there's, as I said, there's other ideas there. Ian R. Crane, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he has talked about this a lot. He's talked about the fact that the thing about oil is, I mean, getting oil out the ground is very, very difficult because it's deep down. But what happens is the Russians, it's an open secret in Russia. If you leave an oil well alone, go away, come back and leave it for 20 years or so, and you go back later, the pressure has returned. Because I mean, oil can't be pumped out; it can't be sucked out with a pump from under the ground, because then you need more energy to get the oil out than the actual oil gives. So there's no point actually pumping it out. There has to be pressure within the oil field, which actually, so the pressure of the earth actually squeezes the oil out. So all you have to do is make a hole with a drill, and the pressure of the earth actually brings the oil up. Simply that pressure squeezes the oil up into the oil rig. That is like a gusher. You know, you heard the phrase a gusher. That's basically what you have to do. But so very often an oil well will be abandoned, not because it's run out. There's still plenty of oil down there, but so much oil has been taken from the oil field that basically there's no pressure left. So the earth is not squeezing any oil out anymore. And so there's no point actually trying to use any kind of mechanical device for forcing the oil up, as I say, unless you can get more energy from the oil than you get from the process by which you extract that oil. It's a kind of a simple economics, simply energy economics basically. But in Russia, as I said, they go away for 20 years, come back later, the oil well has replenished. In other words, it's filled up again and the pressure is back. So some people say that's just oil leaking from other areas, but could it be that oil is actually self-replenishing? It grows like a plant, and it's not fossil fuel at all. But of course, I mean, in Russia, they, as I say, it's an open secret. They do that, but they don't tell anyone. Because if they ever spoke openly about this, think what it would do to the price. The price of oil would plummet. So that's basically what. I'll just zoom that in a bit so you can see the nodding donkey. There you go. I'll be talking more about donkeys in a minute. Real donkeys. This, the cipher of the Industrial Revolution. The smokestack of the power station or factory. Tall chimneys of the urban industrial centre, spewing out clouds of smoke and soot and other things into the environment. For 200 years now, since the Industrial Revolution, this has been a common sight all over the world, starting in Britain and spreading out to other countries in Europe, then across to the North America, to all this. Till we have now the industrial city, which is spread over across the entire globe. Fossil fuels, all by fossil fuels, not just oil but coal as well. It's been an essential part of that, especially in the first half of the Industrial Revolution, the first century. Now there are alternatives, of course. One of those is wind turbines. You'll find that environmentalists are talking a lot about transitioning from an oil-based energy supply into renewables. And renewables is one of these kind of buzzwords of the modern age, along with words like infrastructure and resources and sustainable. You'll be hearing me say those words a lot over the course of this talk. Now wind turbines are very, very interesting because technically they're free energy devices, because the actual generation comes from the wind. So there's actually no generation cost at all. However, you still have to pay for electricity generated by a wind turbine, because wind turbines are actually, in economic terms, are very inefficient. They're a very inefficient way indeed of generating electricity. First of all, you need some kind of storage, because the wind doesn't always blow, does it? I mean, it depends where you are in the world. The most common place to find wind turbines is actually in the north, on the western side of Scotland and northern England, where there's the largest concentration of these things, because that tends to be a very, very windy area. In other places where there's less wind, there's not much point in putting these things up. They suffer from maintenance problems. Even when they're not being crashed into by UFOs, they have other issues. They're very complicated, there's a lot of moving parts in them. So when there's too much wind, they overload and they burn out. they've been blown over in very, very strong gales. All kinds of other issues which make this, there's no way that this kind of system could replace industrial fossil fuels. There is something else that can, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but this is not this. And solar power as well suffers from similar problems. In other words, the sun doesn't always shine. You have this very complicated system which requires a lot of maintenance. Again, you have quite a small economic or energy profit margin, so to speak, when it comes to solar power. It's strange, therefore, how solar power and wind power are the only free energy devices that are we actually have in common use at the moment, and the only ones that are accepted to be viable, and the ones that the environmental movement is all over in terms of enthusiasm. Right, there are other alternatives as well. This is a nuclear power station. Now, nuclear power has been around now probably since the end of World War II. It's another non-fossil fuel based replacement for fossil fuels. Probably the most viable, actually, is nuclear power in basic within the mainstream terms. And I understand why some environmentalists are now saying nuclear power is maybe not such a bad thing. I don't agree with that, and I'll explain why I don't agree over the course of this event. Now, this is a form of energy that is not combustion. The energy is generated very, very differently. It comes from heat, and the heat is created by the splitting of atoms, not a chemical reaction of atoms of substances. How they work is you get a heavy metal such as uranium, which has an unstable atomic structure and decays rapidly. You get this atomic decay. This is where atoms split apart and the pieces fly off and things like that. Now, uranium is the primary fuel source. Although uranium is going to run out as well pretty soon, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But what this does is you get this uranium, and you purify it until you get a critical mass, and when that happens, the atomic nucleus will split apart within the uranium, and the hadrons, the component particles of the atomic nucleus, will fly off and they'll hit other nuclei, and those will split apart, etc., etc. And this generates a lot of heat. And you can take that heat and you can use it to boil water. Or there's various different kinds of heat exchanger within nuclear power stations. One of the most common is you just simply run it through boiling. It's called a pressurized water reactor. You just simply run water through the reactor. It cools down the reactor, and the heat is transferred to the water, which then runs a turbine. The turbine spins a dynamo, and you have electric power. What you also have, though, is some serious environmental and health and safety hazards connected to nuclear fission power. This is called fission. The splitting of atoms apart is called nuclear fission. There's other forms of nuclear power which I'll talk about in a moment. But fission is the conventional way that nuclear power is generated. Now, these problems really include ionizing radiation. This ionizing radiation is deadly to all living cells and will kill you if you get enough of it. And I've seen people going in for radiotherapy at the hospital who come out looking a bit worse for wear, shall we say, because they've been exposed to ionizing radiation to try and heal cancer, for example. Now, in the case of the nuclear power, there's another problem, conventional nuclear power, and that is waste. The uranium fuel, once it's gone through this process of nuclear fission, transforms into something else called plutonium, which is the most deadly substance known to man. This substance then can be used to make nuclear weapons, and which is probably one of the reasons the nuclear weapons industry endures. If you want to turn it into a bomb, then you have to store it, and plutonium has a half-life, I think, of 300,000 years. So you have to put it somewhere where it can be safe for 300,000 years, where it'll be kept away from the environment, because if it leaks out, you get a terrible problem with toxic pollution. So they've been putting it in underground chambers and things like that, and locking it away. But I mean, there's a limit on how much you can actually lock away And eventually, if you keep using nuclear fission power, you're going to run out of places to put it, and you're going to just fill the entire, all the uranium, all the usable uranium ever mined will be converted into toxic plutonium, which will just be lying around in vaults for future generations to have to deal with, if this doesn't kill them. So that's the downside of this nuclear fission power. But there is an alternative that's permitted in the mainstream. That's nuclear fusion. Now, I've done an entire video on this because I'm lucky. Where I live in Oxford, I'm just a few miles away from the Culham Centre for Fusion Energy. This is one of the world's principal locations for the research into fusion energy. Now, fusion is very, very different. Firstly, you don't need heavy uranium and other heavy metals with unstable atoms. The fuel for nuclear fusion is something called deuterium, and it's also known as heavy water, and it's extremely common indeed. In fact, it's in normal water. In this jug of water I have here, there's probably about 50 to 100 milligrams of deuterium in this. Which means if you take into account all the water in the world, you have a virtually infinite supply of deuterium, as much that we're ever going to need for millions of years. That's how the nuclear fusion. Now, what happens is with fusion, it's very, very different. These deuterium atoms are not split apart, but they're forced together to create a new element. And in doing so, they also release heat. They actually release about 10 times, I think, as much heat as a fission event within a heavy atom. The problem is it's getting it to work. Now, they've been working on this since the 60s. This is a nuclear fusion reactor called a tokamak. The problem is you have to heat the deuterium up to a very, very high temperature to get fusion to take place. And it happens naturally in the sun, but then the hydrogen in the sun, deuterium is a hydrogen isotope. The deuterium in the sun is put under such enormous pressure that it happens much more easily. We can't have pressures like that. We can't create environments of pressure like that on Earth, so we have to heat it up. And we know it works, but there's a lot of engineering challenges associated with this method, which means it's going to be a while until we actually have usable nuclear fusion power. And so this is why a lot of the environmentalists are saying it's no good because it will take too long. The Earth will die before then. And they're probably right, actually, although we differ on a few issues. Now, this is a very, very important man in this story. This is Richard Heimberg. Now, this is a guy, he's a futurologist, a teacher and a journalist, and he has written a book with a great title. It's called The Party's Over. Brilliant title. It's about something called peak oil. Now, peak oil is basically the idea that oil will no longer become economically viable because at some point it's going to reach a point where there won't be enough of it, basically. As I said, the oil will never completely run out. There's always going to be plenty of it around, but the extractable oil is going to run out. The oil which we can get, which is in oil wells where there's pressure to squeeze it out, in oil wells where it's not too deep to drill, in oil wells where it's not in some place that's so inaccessible we can't access it, or maybe we can access it, but the energy required to access that oil will be greater than the oil extracted. And as I said, that's the threshold over which extraction becomes pointless, simply for energy economic reasons. So Richard Heimberg's written this book called The Party's Over, which is all about that. And he's a bit of a pessimist, actually. He has a rather grim vision for the future, which is in films like Mad Max you see this played out. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But what he sees is we're living in essentially a perfect storm. A perfect storm through which population and energy, population is expanding, civilization is expanding, the world is modernising, countries which were previously poor are now becoming richer, more energy is needed for them, and so we need more and more energy. At the same time, the energy that's accessing that we have to access is declining. Now, peak oil is where the production of a particular oil well, or even all the oil in the world, peaks. It reaches a certain point where it reaches its peaks, and then it starts to decline. Then the oil coming out of that oil well will start to get less and less and less until it crosses the threshold where it's no point good carrying on with it, and it becomes a dead well, an empty well. Now, many oil wells have peaked already. Many entire countries have peaked, and Heimberg believes that the entire world is effectively peaking now. We've reached the point where we've reached global peak oil. Some people say it actually happened in maybe 2008, 2009. Other researchers say it won't happen until about 2020 or 2025. But whenever the actual moment of peak oil occurs, which can't be calculated precisely, we're basically at that point now generally. And so we have an expanding civilization needing more energy, and there's less and less energy coming. And that's a very, very worrying situation from Heimberg's point of view. Richard Heimberg, he does a lecture, and he's very, very interesting because he has this little tagline. He compares it to yeast. Now, some of you may have done some home brewing. You know how it works. You put sugar and yeast into a vat with something. If it's wine, it's grapes. If it's beer, it's hops. It depends what kind of drink you're making. Apples, cider, things like that. Now you know how it works. The yeast consumes the sugar, and the sugar is basically goes through a chemical reaction within the yeast as the yeast eats it, and it excretes alcohol, which is why you have the drink is alcoholic and make you drunk. Now what happens is when that process is finished, what happens to the yeast? The yeast just has no more sugar to eat, so it dies and it sinks to the bottom, and you get that slimy substance on the bottom, which some people turn into Marmite and things like that. But it's basically that slimy substance on the bottom is basically yeast extract. It's dead yeast. And Heimberg's tagline is very amusing because he puts up on the slide, he says, "Are humans more intelligent than yeast?" Because he's comparing yeast to what's happening to us. We're basically eating the sugar of civilization and excreting whatever it is. And at some point that's going to run out. What's going to happen to us? Are we going to die like the yeast? Now, I don't agree with Richard Heimberg. I must point that out now. I think he's wrong. But in order to understand this issue, and I'll explain why I think he's wrong, but in order to understand the issue that I'm talking about this evening, you have to be able to see this matter through his eyes. You have to understand how this entire subject looks through Heimberg's eyes. Okay, so I will be explaining why I think Heimberg is wrong shortly. Now, Heimberg talks about this, but it's basically this is a history of the world's energy supply. Right. Now, for most of our history, I mean, I'm going to leave aside issues like Atlantis and stuff like that, or I just pretend those aren't real issues for the time being. Okay, I'll do that several times in the course of this talk. Well, let's pretend that the conventional view of historical development is correct. We basically have lived most of our lives as primitive hunter-gatherers with nothing more than muscle power. That is the power of our own bodies, which I just demonstrated to you earlier. Okay, we had nothing but that to deal with. So we had basically, we could do all the tools we had, all the accoutrements we had for our civilization was what we could carry, push, pull, or kick. And this can be traced into the early civilizations of the world, Egypt, Sumer, etc. Which, when they began, they built some large communities and cities and things like that. They had yet to invent the wheel, they had yet to invent the lever, they had yet to invent the pulley. These things came along as a product of these civilizations. They didn't start off with them. This is an image of this is a conventional image of people building the pyramids of Egypt. Now, again, some of you will dispute whether this is accurate. You see people with muscle power simply moving things along, slaves or builders moving things along like that. Now, if you I know that some of you will say, well, that's not how they built the Egyptian pyramids. Let's just pretend they did. Okay, so the Egyptian pyramids were built by a society that used human muscle power primarily. Now, this changed over time, though, and one of the major revolutions was when we learned how to domesticate animals. We persuaded beasts of burden, animals, to come and live with us, and they would do a lot of this muscle power work for us. In return, we would feed them and protect them from predators and things like that. And these animals eventually became domesticated. They became the farm animals and beasts of burden that we know of today. This here is a donkey. This is a picture taken in Egypt of a donkey pulling a cart of some kind of a farm produce. Now, the donkey is a very strong animal. It's probably about 4 times as strong as a big man. So the farmer is using this donkey to pull this cart, because if he had to pull the cart himself, he wouldn't be able to. He'd need to get 4 of his friends to come and help him. But it's easy just to get the donkey to do it. So he's domesticated this donkey. The donkey allows the donkey to eat in the pasture, and the donkey then, in return, pulls this cart. So we started using animal muscle power as well as human muscle power. For many animals, their muscle power is much greater than ours. Here's another one with it. This is a camel, which is an even bigger and stronger creature than a donkey. And this photograph is also taken in Egypt. The camel has another advantage over the donkey. It's very, very well adapted for hot climates and hot, dry climate, as you often find in the Middle East. The camel can go for 6 months without drinking. It's that well adapted to hot, desert, dry environments. And it's called the ship of the desert, the camel, for very good reasons. It means that the camel can cross the desert where you could never any other way. And the camel can take you right across the Sahara Desert. You ride on its back. You can travel hundreds and hundreds of miles across completely dry desert. The kind of journey you couldn't possibly make on your own. If you tried to walk that, you'd be dead within 10 miles. But the camel can cross the desert. Same with the donkey. The donkey wouldn't get much further than you. But the camel is the animal which we've domesticated for use in that kind of environment. This is a picture taken in South America of a man with a horse pulling a plough. Now, as you see, it just shows the strength of the horse, the amount of muscle power that a horse has compared to a human. There's no way you could pull this plough through the soil. And there's the guy, the farmer, is standing on the plough, guiding the horse, which is really quite something that shows how strong the horse is. You couldn't, if you wanted to use slaves to do that, you would have to get about 20 of them and pull them along. You did a massive amount of food and water for those slaves. Which is, again, it's an illustration of how muscle power, animal muscle power actually is so effective. Domestication of animals actually, along with the Industrial Revolution, is one of the reasons slavery was abolished, believe it or not. I don't think people did it out of the kindness of their hearts. It just became uneconomical to have slaves. So fossil fuels, in a sense, has freed up humanity from slavery. So they're good things, fossil fuels, and of course this guy's not going to have 20 slaves when he's got a horse that can do the job. So that's modern farms, of course. This is an old-fashioned type farm with traditional agriculture. A modern farm doesn't have horses even. It has tractors, which are petrol-driven or diesel-driven. So there you have fossil fuels, and that's very important. We'll come to that. Because all this changed. It changed very suddenly within a few decades, literally a blink of an eye in historical terms. Everything transformed. This happened about 200 years ago when the Industrial Revolution began. Suddenly we managed to access fossil fuels. Specifically coal in the early period of the Industrial Revolution. Oil came later, but coal mining. Coal transformed the earth. Big cities started, the big urban industrial city arose for the first time ever. People moved from the countryside into the city and began working in factories. I mean, it was an awful situation for many. Charles Dickens has written about the early industrial city very vividly in his novels, and how disturbed he was by the poverty and suffering in these early industrial cities. But the industrial city did create a much, much better life for people down the line. Sort of life that we're living now in most parts of the Western world. This caused, what the Industrial Revolution did was it caused a massive increase in population. The Earth's population at the moment is about 7.5 billion, depending on how it's counted, depending on figures. But 200 years ago, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, it had barely hit 1 billion. So it's much less, it's much lower than the population of India today. India is about 1.2 billion today. China is about 1.5 billion. But the population of the entire world was below those countries just 200 years ago. The Industrial Revolution, through the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution took over the world. It started here, right here in Britain. South Wales specifically, I think, is where can be said to be the place where the spark was lit for the Industrial Revolution, because this is where the big coal mines began. Some people described South Wales as the equivalent, and the Bristol Channel, the Seven Seas we call it in Wales, as the Persian Gulf of the Persian Gulf of the 19th century, before oil took over from coal. It's, as I said, the world's population was it took thousands and thousands of years of us living through the ancient, through prehistory, through the ancient world, the ancient civilizations and empires, the Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance. The population of the planet was less than 1 billion. At some point, I think it was like just a few 100,000 at one point. I think we actually went through a bottleneck at some point in the lower Paleolithic. But once that population hit 1 billion and the Industrial Revolution began, it hit 2 billion by 1900. It took just a century for the Earth's population to double. That's quite spectacular. A lot of the doomsday predictions I'm going to talk about are based on population growth. And so you can understand from someone who doesn't understand the issue completely that the Earth can look overpopulated, and this is a terrible disaster because there's too many people. The downside of in the Industrial Revolution is manifold. One of those is environmental destruction. You see a forest here that has been destroyed by acid rain. Acid rain is basically where rainwater becomes more and more acidic because of pollution from factories, and it's doing terrible damage to. It's destroying forests. It's destroying waterways, fresh water supplies, things like that. So the downside is terrible environmental destruction. The earth being polluted, oceans being poisoned, topsoil being eroded, air being unfit to breathe, water being unfit to drink. Species becoming extinct because they lose their habitats through these disasters. Forests being cleared for inefficient farming because of what I'm going to talk about later is not available. The earth is effectively really, really sick. It's being killed. It's like being slowly choked to death, and it's because of us, because of our activities. It's very sobering to think that. I think that's true. Now, what you'll often hear in the media today and in the environmental political movements is they talk about carbon dioxide, or carbon as it's been rebranded. This is the idea that carbon dioxide emissions actually are changing the world's climate. Now, you may not agree with that, I don't, but whether you do or not, you cannot avoid the fact that the use of fossil fuels is our industrial society, and its dependence on fossil fuels is damaging the natural world. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I'm now just going to change the film chip because this one is run out, and I'm going to put a new one in, and I'll be back shortly. And I'm back. Well, another problem related to fossil fuel use is health and safety. This is a big one. We have here a picture of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Deepwater Horizon is an oil rig that was specifically designed to extract oil from much deeper locations than say the North Sea. The North Sea is only like 200 to 300 feet deep. It's a shallow sea, and the oil is just beneath the surface. So the North Sea oil rigs don't have to go down very deep. This was a oil rig designed to extract oil from a sea that was 4,000 feet deep, and the well was much deeper. The actual well went 35,000 feet down. This is the deepest oil extraction operation in the world, or was. But it was destroyed. It was destroyed in an accident. There was an explosion, and oil started leaking, and there was a huge environmental catastrophe which devastated the Gulf of Mexico, completely knocked back a 400-year-old sustainable fishing industry, ruined the tourist industry, and has poisoned the environment for centuries to come. Ian R. Crane has said an awful lot about this, because Ian is a former oil company executive. So this is another downside of fossil fuel use: safety. Working on an oil rig is, I think, one of the most dangerous things you can do. Another is mining, again a fossil fuel extraction industry. The oh, the number of people who get killed. There's other examples. There's the Piper Alpha disaster where an oil rig sank and hundreds of men drowned. There's just so many different examples of this. So that's another reason why fossil fuels have a dark side to them. Fracking. Fracking is a new way of extracting natural gas. Now, a lot of what used to be run by coal and oil is now run by natural gas. Natural gas seems to be taking over from a lot of the role that coal used to play. Usually because its carbon emissions are lower. So even some environmentalists are in favour of fracking and natural gas extraction now. But fracking is a way of getting more natural gas out. What you do is you drill your well down into the gas pockets, but then you put in explosives that break the rock apart and allow more gas to flow into the well. But the thing is, you put chemicals down as well, water, massive amount of water and chemicals in there as well. Sounds pretty simple. You think nothing wrong with that, except the problem is when you start breaking apart the ground, you get earthquakes. The toxic chemicals leak into the environment, even from as deep as 12,000 feet below the surface. You get toxic chemicals leaching their way up to the surface and getting into the water, our drinking water. They get into the air. The gas itself, coal bed methane, is toxic. It enters the air you breathe. You can't smell it. You never know it's there. The only time you realise there's coal bed methane and you're breathing it in is when you start getting ill, and your family start getting ill, and your animals. If you have a farm, your animals start dying, and the grass starts to wither and the trees fall down. Ian has done something called Voices from the Gas Fields, and I do recommend it. It's an hour-long documentary all about fracking, and how terrible it is, and how it's been brought in and how it must be stopped. And I think what it is, it's actually a big bubble. There's not even enough gas down there to even make it worthwhile. So all they're poisoning the environment and blowing things up and underground and putting toxic chemicals into our water, then in the end they won't even extract enough gas to actually make it worthwhile. So as Ian has theorised, could it be that this whole operation is simply something designed to make the land unusable for a much longer term geostrategic purpose? Population reduction, things like that. I'll come on to that later. Now this is the tar sands. Now tar sands is exactly what it sounds like. It's sand mixed with tar, and tar, of course, is an oil-based substance which you can extract and get energy from. The problem is this is actually a tar sands pit in Canada. Now these pathways you see going through the tar, they're actually big. They're not just pathways where people walk along. These are big, wide roads used by monster dumper trucks for extracting the sands and processing them. It is filthy. It's an eyesore. It's a nose sore as well, apparently, because it stinks to high heaven. It's very bad for the environment. The toxic tar gets released into the water, into the air. Birds land on this and they get the tar on their feathers and they die. So tar sands is another alternative oil source which is just very, very, very bad indeed. And of course all this costs money. Is anyone watching this film can honestly say to me that your energy bills have not increased in the last few years? They have. It's the price of oil, the price of fossil fuel generation is going up. It's crippling people's personal economy, the economy of people so much so that some people are actually priced out of the market altogether and they don't actually have electricity. Half the people in the third world don't have electricity because they essentially are priced out of the market. The whole thing is priced out of their market. Because the generation cost of fossil fuels, whatever form it is, and conventional generation, electricity generation, is so high. Because you have to extract the energy, you have to extract the fuel first of all, which of course is, as I've explained, is a complicated, expensive, dangerous operation. You then have to refine it, and you have to transport it in tankers, in lorries. You then have to generate it in power stations or in car engines. You have to then have a national grid, which is the national grid itself is very, very wasteful. The national grid is essentially a network of wires that covers the entire country and all other countries as well, charged at certain points by power stations. Well, one of the biggest power stations in Europe is just down the road from me, Didcot, just south of Oxford. Ironically, it's very close to the Culham Centre for Fusion Energy, which is I always find quite a nice juxtaposition. Then it's basically a network of wires. These are copper wires because copper is very low resistance, I think the only metal that's better at conducting is silver, but silver's too expensive, so they use copper. The thing about it is copper is low resistance, but it's not zero resistance. So half the power is lost to resistance within the wire. So it's incredibly wasteful, having the generation source such a long way from the use. But how is the using the place where the actual work is done? The thing about it is, though, I mean, this national grid is charged at certain points along it by these power stations, whether it's nuclear fission power stations, coal-fired power stations. Didcot is a combination of an oil, coal, and gas-fired power station, and that charges the national grid and provides the energy. So it's an incredibly inefficient system when you think about it. It's you have this network of wires. See, this is what I'm talking about here. The pylons. These cover the countryside. They ruin the landscape. They ruin the views of many areas of natural beauty, even more so than the wind turbines. Wind turbines, I should point out, are also bad for the environment because they kill birds, they kill bats, and things like that. But these are also bad for the environment in terms of simple aesthetics, simply the way the landscape looks, which does harm the tourist industry of some areas of natural beauty. They're also dangerous. These things are damn dangerous because kids, I mean, I used to do this when I was a kid. Kids being kids, they'll try to climb them, and they'll get electrocuted. I never climbed to the top of one of these. I just climbed a little way. But some of my friends were going really high on these things, and that's extremely dangerous. Also, there are cancer pockets around where these things go. If your house is underneath one of these, apparently leukemia rates are going up, things like that. And it is wasteful. The energy, as I say, this inefficient, dangerous, toxic, environmentally damaging energy source is then transported via this national grid, which is ugly, dangerous, and environmentally damaging, to wherever it's needed to, say, run this camera, or run this computer, or run these lights. Couldn't anyone come up with a better system than that? Is that really all we can do? Is that our best option? Do we have to put up with that? Yeah, it's a situation. It's a grim thing, isn't it? It's a pretty measly way to do things, isn't it? Yeah. Now I'm going to just illustrate what I'm talking about here through a series of graphs. Now these graphs, I don't know, can you see them? Well, you should be able to see. Yeah, you should. I think you can see these all right. These are very simple graphs. On the x-axis you have quantity. On the y-axis you have time. This is a qualitative graph. It's not designed to measure anything in particular. It's just designed to illustrate. So it's a qualitative graph. I've just marked the actual time axis. You see, the time axis there is not marked with years and months and days. It's just past, future, and the present day. It's very, very simple like that. I think you understand. Now you see here you have a blue line. That represents population levels, the number of people in the world. You have a red line there which illustrates energy consumption. Now what we have here, this is prehistory. This is for thousands upon thousands of years of human existence before the beginnings of civilization, where our population was very, very low because we were dependent on muscle power, and we had very little energy. And energy availability is directly proportional to population level, as we saw with the Industrial Revolution and the population explosion that followed it. So we have low population, low energy usage. We just have our muscle power and the occasional log fire we can light whenever we're cold. That's how we lived, and we used to cook our food on an open fire. Yeah, cook stuff like that. We used to hunt and gather food, cook it on an open fire, under the stars, etc., etc. So that's how people lived, really until quite recently. In overall terms of our population, our presence. I mean, again, it's contentious of how long humans have been on the Earth, but say it's 1 million years. Well, until 10,000 years ago, we were living like this, basically. Before that, there was Neanderthal man and Homo erectus and Australopithecines and Lucy, etc. So this is how we lived. Then we get to the Industrial Revolution. Well, it wasn't. We started off with animal power, like I said, and eventually we hit fossil fuels, and then energy consumption soars, goes right up. See there? That red line goes right up. It's energy consumption going up, and of course, population follows. That's the Industrial Revolution I talked about. The Earth's population doubles in a century. And right, we're going back to prehistory here, and we see we have very few people, very low energy availability, and these are resources. Now the green line there represents resources. The red line is energy consumption. The blue line is population. The green line is resources. Now, by resources, another of these buzzwords of the modern world. You'll hear environmentalists use it all the time, but it effectively means anything that we use and we need. Resources includes things such as, well, food obviously, but also fresh water. It includes topsoil. It includes fossil fuels. It includes anything that we use for our life is resources. And as you see here, because our population was so small and our energy availability was so small, resources were very high. We didn't really use them at all to their potential. As I said, our resource use consisted of maybe a couple of woolly mammoths and some deer, of some vegetables we picked, and a couple of bits of dry wood for our log fires. That was it. That was all the resources we used. Then the Industrial Revolution happens, population goes up, energy consumption goes up, resources start coming down. So we start eating into that resource pool of the earth. We start using up topsoil, using up fresh water, using up food production. I mean, our farms became more productive, but the topsoil starts to erode, and that's a big problem in the modern world. So resources start to come down, and Heimberg talks about, he says we're consuming resources as if they were infinite when they're not, and he uses a phrase like natural capital being treated like income. So we're guzzling through the resources of the world as if it was just income that was infinite, when in fact it's natural capital which is not infinite. Now we're going back to prehistory here. We have the resources high, population, energy low, and there's a grey line now I've added to the graph. It's also very low, and that is environmental damage. Environmental damage was very low. I mean, basically, we may sort of we may kill off a few reindeer, and that might reduce their numbers a bit. You know, we might light a fire underneath a tree, and the tree might get its leaves singed a bit, you know, because we lit a fire underneath the tree at one of our camps. That was the limits of environmental damage in those days, in prehistoric times. But then, then Industrial Revolution, environmental damage soars with population and energy consumption, because we start putting out pollutants, we start eroding the tops. You know, the resource depletion and environmental destruction are kind of linked. We start poisoning the oceans, we start poisoning the air, we start poisoning the fresh water, species start dying off, because we're either hunting them to extinction or we're destroying their habitats. So that's the situation where this is the perfect storm that Heimberg talks about. And you see, if you want it, that's kind of where we are at the present day. Heimberg is extrapolating something very serious to a point where population, environmental damage, and energy consumption keeps on soaring and soaring as civilization expands. At the same time as resources, specifically oil in the case of his own research, this is what kind of peak oil is when this green line of resources descends. And this is what he calls the perfect storm. It's a terrible increase of environmental damage, population, energy consumption, minimal resources. Now, Heimberg, I must say first of all, Heimberg is one of the more reasonable and more optimistic commentators within this field. There are some much more. There are some far more extreme examples which I'm going to talk about. This is where it could end up. This is the vision. See, that's kind of the present. These two are kind of the present day. That's the vision where it might end up to these extremes. And this is a worst case scenario that Heimberg fears, and many others. As you see, what's happened is resources. We guzzle through this natural capital to the point where it's all gone. Resources have depleted to nothing. Environmental destruction has reached the point of total toxic overload, so the Earth is basically dead, or near death. It's near biological death, thanks to us. And then, of course, at that point, no resources means energy consumption plummets. We basically stop, because we don't have any fossil fuels anymore. We've got nothing more to burn. Energy consumption drops back to its prehistoric level, and most sinisterly of all, the blue line goes down too. Population goes down as well. Now, this is chilling, but it means that people in this scenario will die. In fact, the majority of people in the world will die. Will die. Not, you know, you may think, well, hang on, we're still alive, aren't we? We don't need all these fossil fuels to live, don't we? We need fossil fuels for farming. As I said, we now have tractors to pull ploughs and not horses. Those tractors need oil. You see, at the moment, about 7 calories for every 1 calorie of edible food produced, you need about 7 calories of fossil fuel to produce that 1 calorie. Now, you go back just 50 years and it was the other way around. It was 1 calorie of fossil fuel for 7 calories of food. That gradually narrowed until it came 1 to 1, and now it is now the other extreme. Sleep tight. The fall. The party's over, as Heinberg says, but it's, as I said, he's one of the more reasonable people in this field. Yeah, you need. I say, if you need fossil fuels for the plants, for the tractors, you need it for the lorries to take the food to the supermarkets, because food has moved a long way from its original source. I mean, this is one of the problems. You see, I bought some tomatoes the other day that came from Zimbabwe. They were taken from a farm in Zimbabwe and brought to Britain for me to eat. Well, can't I eat tomatoes that are grown in Oxford? People grow them in their greenhouses, and then the Zimbabweans can eat the tomatoes from Zimbabwe. But no, we have to move them right across the world. You see this more and more. You see, in terms of food production, things that don't need to be exported and imported are being exported and imported. It's crazy. But the fall, it's sometimes called the crash, it's sometimes called the energy apocalypse, the civilizational collapse, whatever you might want to call it. It's known as the fall. Don't worry, this talk is going to get more cheerful. No. But as I say, Heinberg is one of the more reasonable commentators on this issue. There are some that are far more extreme. There's this guy called Pentti Linkola, who's a Finnish individual, and he is a kind of like, he's so extreme. He actually says that the Earth, in order to save the planet, the United Nations has to bombard every city on Earth with nuclear weapons to kill 90% of the world's population, and then the remainders will continue to live in a kind of extreme communism, based on controlled resources, and no technology will be allowed except bicycles and sailing boats and things like. He's very extreme, and he's inspired many people. There's this guy there's this American called Soren Renner, who is very much inspired by Pentti Linkola, and he has a catchphrase, and it is, "Billions will die, we will win." And he used this kind of like, this is how it's described: is when the ship goes down, there's 100 people in the water, there's only 1 lifeboat, it only holds 10 people. The haters of life are those who will reach out their hands to the people drowning in the water to pull them into the boat, knowing that they will overcrowd the boat and sink it. The lovers of life are those who are willing to take the ship's axe and hack at the hands on the gunwales. Billions will die, we will win. So I've got to have a drink after talking like that. It's messing my throat up. But is it really like this? Is the world really like this? This is the question. I mean, we'll come to that in a minute, but I mean, I should first point out there are certain steps being taken, I believe, in secret, which are heading towards maybe Linkola's nightmare. Now, we have something called Agenda 21, which essentially is advocating pretty much what Linkola is suggesting in a slightly more watered down level. But it says things like firstly the system of nation states, which has worked very well in geopolitics for centuries now, needs to be broken down, and the world needs to come under a single one world government. The economy needs to be changed from one of a capitalist free market into, well, it's not a capitalist free market, it's kind of a corporatist, but it needs to be changed basically from whatever it is now into a resource-based economy, which would resemble a very extreme form of communism. And that's basically, people have energy rations. You have which has already been done now in the form of carbon footprints. There's talk of carbon credits becoming the world currency. And I think there are steps being made to actually change, to actually bring about this right now in terms of environmental modification and geoengineering. Now, this is a picture of aircraft trails in the sky, which I believe, and it's a long subject, but I think this is some form of environmental modification program. And it's being organised from right here in Oxford, again, not far from where I'm sitting. I do seem to live in a very, very sort of auspicious and kind of precarious and fatefully charged part of the world, because just even closer than Didcot and Culham is the Oxford Martin School, where you can actually do a course on geoengineering. And no doubt there are talent scouts there looking out for the right kind of people to do things like this. We have, I mean, I don't know what chemtrails are specifically. Some people say that it's climate change alleviation. Some people say it's, some people say chemtrails are some kind of a biological, injecting biological agents to transform human life and things like that. Whatever it is, it's bad news for us. Now this here is a packet of, we have here a packet of genetically modified food. Again, now we're told GM foods are safe. A lot of environmentalists like Mark Linus, he's very pro-GMO foods now. Okay, right. He's pro-nuclear power, he's pro-GMOs, and he and his fellow watermelon, George Monbiot, watermelon, you know, green on the outside, red on the inside. They're now pro these sort of things that the rest of the environmentalists are against. But GMO foods, we're told they're safe, it's okay, the science has been done and it's safe. Well, you'll find that the science has actually been done by people who have a vested interest in the industry. For instance, the US Food and Drug Administration, 2/3 of its members are shareholders for Monsanto. Alternatively, we had a guy in Britain called Arpad Pusztai, a Hungarian scientist who worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Today it's called the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs. He was asked to test genetically modified potatoes to see if they were safe. He was an independent scientist, no links to the industry. He said, they're not safe, don't let people eat them, whatever you do. And they said, wrong answer, Arpad, and they sacked him. So, under Agenda 21, under this New World Order, there, I said it. Under this New World Order, food doesn't need to be good. It doesn't need to sustain you or grow you or keep you alive or keep you in your body in tip-top condition. It just has to keep you moving so you can work to the point where you no longer can work. Then you can die. Someone else can replace you. After it'll only be about 20 years before you're no longer good for work, and then you die. That's what this is about. It's not about. This is why I never touch this stuff. I really wouldn't touch it. The late great Robert Anton Wilson once said, I think I'll look like him when I'm an old man, actually, because he sort of looks a bit like me. I need to grow the beard. But he once said, on a planet that is increasingly resembles one huge maximum security prison, the only intelligent choice is to plan a jailbreak. The late and much lamented Robert Anton Wilson. So yeah, we need to get out of here. We need to get out. Now, can we get out? I mean, Robert Newman, he's got this thing called History of Oil. It's a comedy show. It's quite funny, actually. But Newman is completely ignorant of a lot of the things I'm going to talk about this evening. He believes the Heimberg situation. He's not a Penty Linkler or a Soren Renner, but he is a Richard Heimberg, and he dresses up as a devil on stage, and he says, "There's no way out." And quite funny. You should watch that. Robert Newman's History of Oil. It's quite a funny thing to see. So what we actually need is a form of energy that can actually replace fossil fuels. A form of energy that has the advantages of fossil fuels without any of the disadvantages. A form of energy which is free, or at least very, very cheap. That is abundant. In other words, it won't run out. Well, it's not going to run out for a very, very long time at least. And one that is safe, environmentally friendly and convenient to use. That is efficient. It doesn't have the complexities of solar and wind power that make it unviable. And as luck would have it, there is exactly that. An energy source exists within the very universe, within the very fabric of the universe. and it can be extracted, and there are ways and means of doing it. And I'm going to discuss some of those methods. And one of those is one of the first I'm going to discuss is it involves a person who called George A. Pigott, and future school children are going to be smirking in classrooms, I'm sure, because it was all about levitating his balls. George A. Pigott, in about 1911, he put out a patent for his device. And this was a device where, by putting electric currents through metallic spheres, he was able to make them basically rise up. The force of gravity was nullified around them. So this was what's known as an electrogravitic effect. There was many others. You may have heard of Thomas Townsend Brown. He's another one. I'm going to discuss another one again, another example of electrogravitics in a minute. But basically using the electromagnetic force to reduce the gravity around a certain something, which makes it reduce in weight, and even can make it float in the air like an astronaut in space, because there's no gravity around it because of this electrogravitic effect. This was done, I think, in 1911. This was done over a century ago. Yet, you know, why do we not know about it? Why is it not famous? But here's a diagram of his device, how it works, which he created himself. Now this is another example of that. This is a diagram of a system developed by Tampere University in Finland in the 1990s. What you have here is you have a ring of magnets, these ring of supercooled electromagnets spinning at 5,000 revolutions per minute. You have here a weight, a 1 stone weight, and suspended over these spinning magnets. So again, you have an electromagnetic field, you put a weight into it. What happens to that weight? Well, believe it or not, this 1 stone weight lost 4.5 ounces of its weight. Now, it didn't lose any mass. There's a difference between mass and weight. Mass is simply the inertia of an object, the amount of object and the amount of inertia exists. This is universal everywhere, no matter whether there's a gravitational field or not. Now, weight is pressure put upon something below it in a gravitational field. So I'm sitting now on this chair, I'm putting pressure, my weight is putting pressure on this chair. My mass is putting pressure on the chair. That mass, that pressure is called weight. But although its mass remained the same, this 1 stone weight became 4.5 ounces lighter. How is that possible? How can a 1 stone weight lose 4.5 ounces of its weight? So just simply because it's in an electromagnetic field. Because if this happened, you see, if you could make this work, you could make aircraft that didn't need wings, or fuel. Gravity itself could become a power source and a source of lift and propulsion for aircraft and for anything else you wanted. Or like a flywheel on you could turn a dynamo with it. I mean, this in itself is a free energy device. It's not possible to talk about the free energy issue without talking about this man, Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in Serbia, and in 1884 he emigrated to the United States. He's one of the greatest geniuses in the world. He's a scientific and engineering prodigy. Even as a young boy, he was fascinated by electricity. He used to go out in thunderstorms and observe the lightning. When he came to the United States, he teamed up with several industrialists, George Westinghouse, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, to try and modernise the world. And he did. I mean, a lot of what we call the modern world is created by Nikola Tesla. For instance, alternating current, which you see, which is running all the electric devices you see around you, the lights, the camera, the computer, all run off alternating current, devised by Mr. Tesla. The thing about it is, though, I mean, I think, I'll tell you a little story. When I was a porter at the hospital, I was talking to a radiographer in the magnetic resonance imager area of the hospital, which is where they do scans with MRIs, and he just had taken delivery of a new MRI machine, this £5.5 million device, and he said, "Oh, it's all mine, £5.5 million of equipment, it's all mine." Ben, look at this is a 3.8 T magnet. It's one of the most powerful magnets in the world. And I said to him, well, what does the T stand for? He says, you know what, I don't know. We just measure magnetic fields, magnetic inductance in T. We say that's 1 T, that's half a T. A fridge magnet is like a couple of micro T's. You know, we just call them T's. And I'm really surprised at this, because this guy is a trained radiographer. He must have studied science at least at A level in school. I'm a hospital porter with a GCSE in English, and I left school at 16. But I knew what T stood for, and he didn't. T stands for Tesla. The unit of magnetic inductance is called the Tesla. Why is it shortened to T? Why should it be shortened to T? It's not like he has a very long name. Tesla's a short name, just 2 syllables. It's not like he's called Nikola Teslarovsky Bondarenko, is he? You know, you'd have to shorten that to T, but not Tesla. So why don't they say the word Tesla? You know why? Because I think they're trying to write this guy out of history. That's why. That's why this trained radiographer didn't know what the unit that he was named for stood for. Sinister, isn't it? And Nikola Tesla teamed up, like say, with several people. He became a rival of Thomas Edison in the end. Thomas Edison wanted direct current, which you get from batteries. He wanted alternating current. They had many other rivalries and things like that. He refused to share a Nobel Prize with Nikola Tesla, with Thomas Edison in the end. Thomas Edison did some horrible things like electrocuting an elephant and things like that in public, and to say how good his direct current was. What Tesla wanted to do, though, is he wanted to generate electricity. It's all about electricity generation. Electricity is not an energy source. It's an energy transfer, okay? The electricity I'm using here is not an energy source. It's generated at the power stations by coal or gas or nuclear fission, and it is distributed on the national grid to me. So that's basically what is going on. So the electricity, like I said, it's an energy delivery system. It's an energy transporting mechanism. Or transferring mechanism, and it's not an energy source. What Tesla said is, well, there is an energy source where I can get electricity, and it's in the very body of the Earth and universe. He said, what I want to do is make this a gift to humanity, to give to demonstrate this source is real, and it can be used to power any electrical plant on Earth forever for all people, to improve the lives of the planet Earth and the people on it. And he was tricked by various people, George Westinghouse, Thomas Edison, J.P. Morgan. Yeah. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. I mean, he teamed up with Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford is the famous motor manufacturer. In 1905, Henry Ford started the first mass-produced car factory, where there was a production line like you get in modern car factories. This meant the cars could be produced that were much cheaper than previously, when the early cars were very expensive. They were custom-made models. This was a mass-produced line, and to begin with, Ford had 2 lines. He had a petrol-driven car line and an electrically driven car line. So both types of car were being produced. Tesla went up to Ford and said, "Look, I will team up with you because I can show people how to generate electricity for your electric cars." And Ford said, "Great, then you can have like cars which need no fuel, and because you don't have to pay for the generation cost because it's free." Well, that was shut down very quickly. J.P. Morgan got involved. There's more on him later. And the electric line was shut down, and Ford was only allowed to produce the petrol line. And the cars we drive today are simply more modern versions of Ford's original petrol-driven cars. Isn't it strange that here we are in the modern world with electronic devices and of the most incredible sophistication all around us, and we're still using Stone Age fuel generation techniques that haven't effectively changed much since the Neolithic era. Why is that? I'll say more on that in a minute. But there are more modern versions of Nikola Tesla. This is John Hutchison. I'll be saying a bit more about him later on as well, because I believe that free energy has a dark side to it. It can be used as a weapon, and I believe the powers that be have turned it into a weapon. But this guy here discovered the Hutchison effect, which is basically how you can release this fifth force from the 0 point field, this area where this free energy comes from, using something simple as electromagnetic interference. Field interference. It's simple as that. This guy has devised. This guy's he's not a trained scientist. He's not an engineer. He's not qualified. He's not a professional. He's what's known in a derogatory term as a tinkerer. Although there's a great tradition in tinkerers. I mean, the Wright brothers were tinkerers. They were amateurs. They ran a bicycle repair shop. They built the first working aeroplane. Thomas Edison himself was a tinkerer. So it's a derogatory term for something that really has a brave tradition. The good thing about being a tinkerer, though, is that you don't have a career to worry about. All you have to do is spend your life in your garden shed, annoying your wife and children because you're married to this machine you're building. John Hutchison is a person like that, and these are the unsung heroes of science, in my view. Now, this guy is very, very interesting. Edward Leeds-Skalnin. You see, you think he doesn't support the English Defence League. That's his name, Edward Leeds-Skalnin. Now, he was a guy who was born in Latvia, and in the early 20th century he moved to the United States. Before he left, though, he was engaged to be married to a young lady called Agnes Scuffs. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. They had a very acrimonious bust-up. And Leeds-Skalnin was the kind of bloke who couldn't really get over it. He spent his whole life lamenting the end of that relationship. I mean, if he'd been a normal guy, I mean, what the rest of us just go out, we get drunk, we cry on our friend's shoulder for a few days, and then we go get on with our lives. He couldn't do that. He couldn't get over this bust-up. And so when he got to the United States, he built a monument to his lost love. It's really an amazing, one of the most amazing structures ever created. It's called Coral Castle. Coral Castle is built from lumps of coral rock, very heavy, very hard rock, which Leeds-Skalnin did single-handed. He built this structure single-handed, working at night without any help, and no one saw how he did it. And there's been many theories, but what he created was the most magnificent thing. For instance, there used to be a revolving door on Coral Castle, which weighed 1.5 tons. It was a lump of coral rock, which weighed 1.5 tons, which he shaped into a square and he put on a pivot. It was so finely balanced that a child could push it open. And finally, these idiots, they went and they took the door off just as part of a maintenance routine. When they put the door back on, they couldn't get it in the right place that Leeds-Skalnin had. So the door doesn't open properly now, which is a shame. But Coral Castle, as I say, it's an incredible place. I mean, today it's actually open to the public today. So if you're ever in it's on the Dixie Highway at Hale Center in Florida. Okay, so if you're ever there, please do go and see it. It costs a few dollars to get in. You can visit it. If I ever go there, I will visit Coral Castle. Coral Castle is so sturdy, it's so robust that it was one of the few buildings in Florida not harmed by Hurricane Andrew in 1997. People took shelter in Coral Castle to get away from the hurricane. Now, how did he build it? How did he move giant lumps of stone? And you know what he said? He said, I used the same technique the ancient Egyptians used to build the pyramids. And this takes us back to the beginning where I said there's some controversy over how the pyramids are built. But there were some books on ancient Egypt. When he died, they found some books on ancient Egypt, and they found these strange electrical generating devices that he said these were the tools he used. So did he somehow manage to create some kind of anti-gravity, electrogravitic machine that can actually pick up these huge lumps of rock and carry them to where he needed them? Could that be? Could that be possible? And that's how he built Coral Castle. We know he died in the 1950s. We'll never know. But he left behind this magnificent monument and a few documents. But isn't that it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you think. Now this guy, while Leeds-Skalnin was busy building his Coral Castle, this chap here, Victor Schauberger, was watching fish swim in streams. You might laugh, but there's a serious point behind this, because free energy it exists in nature. It exists in some weather systems, but also several living organisms have evolved to use it. And one of those is fish. This guy was a forester in Austria, and he used to watch the fish swimming in the stream, and he suddenly realised that the fish actually can propel themselves without flapping their fins, and he worked out how they did it, because he said there was energy in water that was released. In other words, I mean, he may not have used the term, but it's basically free energy can be extracted from very simple devices in water. You don't necessarily need something very, very complicated like a big Large Hadron Collider type generator, or anything such as big and robust as that fusion device, that nuclear fusion thing, which is still under development. Something as similar as a water vortex can release free energy, and the fish have evolved to use it. I've seen them do this at a place called Byberry, where you can see fish in this very clear stream. They're moving along without flapping their fins, and they use their gills to generate water vortices, which release this free energy and propel them along. Now, in 1938, the Nazis annexed Austria, and they offered Leeds-Galdin a job. They offered Schauberger a job, and unfortunately, he did it under protest because he was not a Nazi. But you can't say no when the Nazis offer you a job, otherwise you end up in some camp somewhere. So he worked for the Nazis, and they built some of the devices that Nazis built. These incredible things were the work of Schauberger, were based on Schauberger's work. Now, at the end of World War II, the victorious Allies divided the spoils of war. Some of those spoils was people, it was brains, it was minds of the Nazi scientists. They were split up. The Soviet Union got some of them, Britain got a few of them, but the majority went to the United States. Some of them worked openly, like Wernher von Braun, who designed the V2 rockets, which devastated London. But many worked in secret. Now, the V2 rockets, I mean, the Nazis were way ahead technologically of the rest of the world. They had the cruise missiles, the Doodlebugs. They had, they were leading the race towards the development of the nuclear bomb before Einstein got involved in America, and they had rockets like liquid-fueled rockets that were like the V2, which were the basis of the space rockets which you see today. But that's only just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the start. They were developing free energy anti-gravity technology, which is maybe one of the reasons why the war happened in the first place, because they had to be destroyed, they had to be stopped. And I believe that Operation Paperclip, this program to move the Nazi scientists to the Allied countries, sometimes under false identities, involved the acquisition of this secret technology. There's a guy called SS General Hans Kammler who's working on something called the Beehive or the Bell, which looks like it was some kind of anti-gravity free energy device. That ended up in the United States. Now, there was an amazing incident in 1989 where the cover-up of free energy almost failed. It almost fell apart. I'm just going to get some more drink. The impossible happened. This cover-up actually began to crumble, and there was a bit of a panic situation among the people involved in the cover-up as they tried desperately to get the genie back into the bottle. And I'm talking about something called cold fusion. These guys you see here are Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann. Martin Fleischmann, Stanley Pons. They announced in 1989 that they had discovered a way of creating nuclear fusion at surprisingly low temperatures using a simple, not something complicated, but simple schoolboy science, electrolysis. They put 2 cadmium rods into a bowl of deuterium, and they put electric currents through it, and they got this fusion reaction from it, almost effortlessly. Now, what they'd actually done is they'd actually rediscovered something that had first been observed in 1921. They didn't know that at the time. When it was first observed, it was called the anomalous heat effect. But Pons and Fleischmann went public with this, and well, there's a long, complicated story. See, it wasn't their idea to call it nuclear fusion; it was somebody else's idea, and that person, I think, was a guy who was actually put in to sabotage this whole effort. That's a big, long story. But basically, what happened was there was a sensation all over the world. Nuclear fusion, free energy has been discovered. My goodness me, you know, because we're talking about energy utopia, the kind I'm going to talk about in a minute, was on the horizon. But then there was a couple of attempts to repeat the experiment. A couple of people said, "Oh yeah, we've done it, we can do it." But then the verdict was finally released from the hallowed ivory-towered halls of scientific academia. Sorry, it was all a big cock-up. These 2 guys, they messed up. Fools that they are. And it was huge, massive, embarrassed silence. Pons and Fleischmann were basically They couldn't work again in science. They never really did. But was it? But the thing about it was, it wasn't that simple. I mean, the BBC did a big hit piece called "An Experiment to Save the World," which you can get on YouTube. It's very interesting, not least because it is a lot of propaganda in it, but it gives a completely distorted view of this. Because basically, the cover-up, what happened was, cold fusion works. It's just that they're using the media and using the government and using various other ways of psychological manipulation. They made it look like it didn't. Part of that was even the word cold fusion, because they would say things like, well, there are no neutron emissions from this process, which means there's no, it can't be nuclear fusion, therefore it doesn't work, therefore Pons and Fleischmann are wrong, therefore everything you've done is useless. But that's crap. I mean, the thing is, all that matters is they were generating heat. Okay, that's why when it was first discovered in 1921, it was called the anomalous heat effect. Once you get anomalous heat, you can use it. It doesn't matter whether it's anomalous or not. You don't need to know how it works. There's still mysteries associated with electricity. We don't know everything there is to know about electricity. We still use it. Still power the world with it. Just as long as you have this process that generates heat, you can boil water in a boiler. That boiler can spin a turbine or pistons. That then charges a dynamo. You can get electricity. You can get usable energy from it. You don't need to know how it bloody well works. This was a complete and utter hatchet job. But the cover-up nearly failed. They kept the cover-up going by the skin of their teeth. There's a very, very good documentary called Fire from Water, which was presented by James Doohan, who played Captain. He played Scott in Scotty in Star Trek. Beam me up. We're beaming you up now, Captain. You know. Look at that. That's a utopian vision of the future. Now, just imagine. Now, I'm going to need you to stop and pause and just use your imagination for a moment and imagine what the world would be like if we had free energy. If Tesla and all these other people had their way, and we had free energy, anti-gravity, whatever, all these things. Supposing we had it in the world today. Supposing we'd had it when it was first invented 130 odd years ago. Supposing we'd been allowed it back then. How different would the world be that we're living in today? How different would the world be compared to the one we're living in today? How much it would be transformed. Oh, it's almost impossible to imagine. It's almost impossible to consider, isn't it? To begin with, there'd be no need for a national grid. There'd be no need for fossil fuels of any kind. You would have, you could put a box in your house, which would be very, very cheap to maintain. It would have no moving parts. It would cost maybe £80 to £100. A box about 2 feet square. You could put in your house, and it would provide energy for your house as much as you need forever. Completely free, completely safe, completely abundant, and unlimited. You wouldn't have old people dying of cold every winter because they can't afford the fuel bills. This was interestingly was the thing which motivated Gary McKinnon, the famous hacker and whistleblower, to do what he did. That guy, who's luckily he's not been extradited, he's not been prosecuted, he's safe. But one of the things that moved him to do what he did was the plight of old people dying of cold every winter because they couldn't afford to fuel their homes. That guy's a hero as far as I'm concerned, not a criminal. You could have a device you could put under your car bonnet, which means you could drive your car forever, for as far as you like without stopping for petrol, completely free. You could transport things in vehicles, completely free. You could transform the world in terms of food production. Now, there's other things such as Ormus and Terra Preta, which are like very, very they're hyper efficient fertilizers, which you could use as well. But then basically, if you had free energy, you could put farms wherever you want. You could put farms in places you can't now. Farms are dependent on several things: abundant topsoil and an abundant supply of fresh water. So you need lots of rain, you need lots of topsoil, okay, for farming, which means there's a limit to how much. That limits of the world's food production. those things. Now with free energy you wouldn't need those things, because you could grow things hydroponically. That is, you could create farms. Hydroponics is growing plants without topsoil, but which is not, and with free energy you wouldn't need fresh water. Now these things are not possible under the current system, because although you can create fresh water, you can create it from seawater. It's very easy to filter out the salt, because you can't irrigate land with seawater because of all the salt. That's bad for the land. But you can filter out the salt and then use that water to irrigate land. You could just pump it inland in a pipe. Maybe one devised by Victor Schauberger, one of his designs, one of his log flumes, which are devised by the water vortices. You could actually just get the water flowing inland for no money. At the moment, you can't desalinate enough seawater to irrigate because you need fossil fuels, which cost money. It's not, the fact you have to pay for it is what hampers it. You could have a farm in the middle of the desert. You could transform entire desert lands into lush, green, fertile crops and pastures for livestock. World hunger is no longer a problem. Famines no longer happening. Poverty eliminated. That's the kind of world we could live in if we had this free energy. The world could look like that. A clear sky without any pollution, fresh air, fresh water. And just let's go to the graph. Oh, I'll just illustrate what I mean. Now imagine this is the graph you're familiar with before. Quantity x-axis, time y-axis, past, present day, future. The red line, energy consumption. The blue line, population level. The grey line, environmental destruction. The green line, resources. This is the same graph. This is the continuation of the graph we were looking at before. And as we see here, population is going up. Energy production goes up with population. Environmental destruction increases as we live a destructive fossil fuel based lifestyle. At the very same time, resources are plummeting. And this leads to the fall, which I talked about before. The end is coming. The end, the apocalypse, the crash, whatever you want to call it. Billions will die. We will win. You know, these sort of things I talked about earlier. That's coming. But then, free energy declassified at this point. Now I'm being realistic without being pessimistic here. If you look here on the graph, I've put it slightly in the future. Okay, it's just beyond the present day mark on this graph. It doesn't matter really when, as I said, this is a qualitative graph. There are no units of measurement on it. It's just illustrating the point. Free energy declassified at this point. Okay, so resource depletion stops and begins to recover as free energy enters the human economy and human society. The resources can have a chance to now. Resource depletion will stop, and they'll have a chance to reverse the process, so that topsoil and other things, and food and other things, and life and biomass can then recover in its numbers. So it goes back to its pre-civilizational level. Human population levels off. I think it will at some point level off. Now I know that people talk about the world being overpopulated. Well, I believe the world currently is not overpopulated in terms of human numbers. It appears overpopulated because of our destructive fossil fuel based lifestyle. Take that away and the world will know. I mean, obviously the Earth's bioeconomic capacity is not infinite. You can't have an infinite number of people on a finite sized planet. But you can, using a less destructive means of energy production, let alone a free and safe energy and clean energy production, the Earth could support far, far more people than it does presently. I've no doubt at all that in a free energy economy, the Earth's population, the current population of the Earth would not be excessive in any way. Probably far from it. I mean, I did a back of the envelope calculation about what I was talking about just now, about the future world. Now, I calculate with just 10 Maya cells you could feed Sudan. Sudan is a country which is basically a dust bowl with terrible poverty, lack of resources, lack of energy generation. I live with two guys who come from the Sudan, and they've told me about it. I worked out with just 10 Maya cells. A Maya cell is a form of cold fusion device in a way. It's a free energy form. The inventor Stanley May was killed in mysterious circumstances. I'll come to that again later. But with just 10 of those you could transform Sudan from a dust bowl into a land flowing with milk and honey. Sudan could feed all of Africa. And you don't need just 10 male cells, you could have 100, you could have 1,000, you could have as many as you want. There's no limit. So population, I think, would at some point stabilise at a level pretty much what it is now, maybe a bit more. With the use of free energy, there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. And as a result of this, environmental destruction, the grey line there, starts to go down. Now there's an awful lot that, as with resources, okay, it wouldn't happen overnight. There's a massive amount of healing that needs to be done in terms of the Earth's environment. But with the invention of free energy, we could say, okay, we can turn the corner now. Well, so invention of free energy? That's a Freudian slip. The declassification of free energy, we could say we're turning the corner. It's not too late. We turn the corner, the Earth can now begin to heal. And slowly but surely, Mother Earth can return to her pre-civilizational state with very, very little environmental destruction. Maybe, as I said, light a campfire in the garden and singe the leaves of a tree. But the red line, where do I put the red line? The energy. Where does that go with the declassification of free energy? Well, you can't write it on the graph of a line at all. It's infinite. So I put the infinity symbol on there. It is as much or as little as you need. So the question has to be, if it's all so wonderful, why don't we have it? The skeptics will say, well, it doesn't exist. But I've demonstrated several systems which, there's a long story and I can tell you so much more about why it does exist. It's proved to exist. Can you see this? I'll just enlarge it a little bit. Did these bankers destroy Tesla to stop his gift of free energy for all? JP Morgan, the Warburg and Rockefeller. JP Morgan and other bankers first pretended to back Tesla, but effectively they were only seeking to control him. When they found out he was planning to give the world free energy as a gift, they silenced Tesla using the newspapers they controlled. These are the people like this was a long time ago, a century or more, but the families, we're talking about Morgan, Warburg, Rockefeller, these are families that are still in control of the world. The descendants of these men are still in positions of power all over the world. Nelson Rockefeller, this guy's grandson, he was once asked why he wasn't running for president, and he replied, I don't want to be president because that would be a demotion. We're in a situation where these people, there's been a cover-up of free energy. We have been manipulated into using Stone Age fossil fuel energy technology because basically these people like this have suppressed the truth and they've kept it from us. For whatever reason, control of energy, the fact that energy is limited, it needs to be paid for, it needs to be extracted using dangerous, dirty methods, is quintessential to their control over us. If we had free energy, they couldn't control us. It's that simple. David Icke puts it very, very bluntly. Scarcity equals dependency equals control. Abundance equals freedom. Abundance equals choice equals freedom. With free energy, without poverty, without anything like that, we wouldn't be needed anymore. Now, there's several different motives behind the people keeping this cover up. Now, to use Orwell's analogy, there's the proles. These are normal people like you and me, which make up most of the people in the world. Then there's the outer party and there's the inner party. They don't call themselves that. This is just an analogy from 1984. But the outer party the inner party we'll talk about them in a minute. But the outer party, I think, may be instrumental in suppressing this technology, this free energy technology. Now, the outer party consists of people who don't necessarily want to create a new world order, but they're just very, very rich, very greedy, oil company executives, industrialists, people who are dependent on people for whose wealth and privilege is dependent on the fossil fuel industry or the use of fossil fuels in the world. Say the chairman and the board and the owners of various oil companies. So they're in a position where if people don't use fossil fuels, then they won't need oil, and they won't need coal and other things, and therefore their industry collapses. The declassification of free energy would essentially mean going up to the chairman of Royal Dutch Shell and going, you says, come in. You go into his office and he says, look, I'm just coming to tell you your services are no longer required. And he'll say, oh dear, what can we do? I'll say, well, he'll go, oh well, that's not the end of the world. We're a flexible company. We can adapt. Shell oil. Well, you still need oil to make candles, don't you? We could have shell candles. Great, wouldn't it? Just imagine it. Shell candles. They're pretty colours. They smell nice. They won't stain your wallpaper. There'll be a big dollar on that, won't they? Shell candles. Of course not. That guy and anyone else in his position is going to collaborate with the cover-up of free energy. Even if they're not behind it, they will collaborate with it. They will collaborate with it, and you'll end up with people who not necessarily malicious and want to enslave everyone, but they're just addicted to their position in society and need to keep free energy quiet, just to cover that up. Now, so that's one of the reasons they now, but the nature of this particular need. What is it? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, let's enlarge that. Now, isn't this isn't this the modern human in the modern world? Sick, tired, health, dread, stress, no sleep, fear, worry, anxiety, savings, retirement. Oh, time management, late nights, bills, payments, no time, stress. The introduction of free energy into our society would alleviate most of the current problems that civilization generates. Civilization being the central problem of the planet Earth at the moment. But the majority of those problems are actually a direct result of us not having free energy, basically. I mentioned poverty, environmental destruction, injustice, tyrannical government, things like that. That is a product of the fact that we don't have free energy. And the introduction of free energy would release us of this burden to such a point where we would be free from a lot of the worries and concerns and sadness and heartbreak and structural violence that currently we have to endure. This person here is a perfect citizen because of all these problems she has. She's in that position. Scarcity equals dependency equals control. In order to alleviate these problems, or to at least try to just keep herself from the fear that's generated by them, she's in a position where she will basically do anything. She will do anything that she's told by the powers that be to keep her safe, to keep her safe, because she's in such a precarious position. So she's ruled by fear. If you get ruled by fear, the power of nightmares, as Adam Curtis documentary comes, the governments their new role to protect us from nightmares. It gives them a new role. We've lost hope in dreams. They can't offer us dreams anymore, so they promise to protect us from nightmares. So we live a stressful life where we're dependent on the next pay rise. The next paycheck is dependent. Whether we eat tonight depends on the next paycheck. So you're not going to make a fuss at work, or you won't get that paycheck. You can't. Also, the more you do, your house is dependent on rent payments or mortgage repayments. Again, you're going to do as you're told, because otherwise those payments stop and you lose your home. You're going to basically be a good consumer, because if you're going to buy what the family want for you. So you're going to work extra hours to pay for that. Otherwise, the husband will run off with the kids, and you'll be left alone. That's what makes people dependent. This is why, at the higher level of the inner party, it's not about greed. It's not about money. It's not about oil and keeping the oil flowing and keeping your wallet full from oil payments. It's about control. It's political, not economic. It's about the wielding of power. On the subject of the inner party, who are they? This is this famous symbol here from the dollar bill, Anno et Coeptis, Novus Ordo Seclorum. He favours our undertaking, new order of the world. It doesn't matter who they are, really. David Icke says they're reptilians. I mean, we talked about this at the beginning of this talk, of this lecture. It doesn't matter, really. I mean, what they do is more important than who they are. I take the idea of reptilians, actually, in disguise, seriously. It's a big subject, too big to go into now, but I mean, there's a case to answer there. But they're the ones who want to create this new world order. For whatever reason, they want to create a global prison camp with a population of 500,000, microchip with electronic implants inside them, who were born, live 20 years, and then work, and then die. And they want that. Now, if you have, there's various, I want to talk about the methods they use to actually keep this under wraps, and I've already discussed one of them when it came to cold fusion. There was a subversion campaign over cold fusion with a man called Stephen E. Jones, and I believe he was behind this, and I don't have time to give you the details, but basically the genie was put back in the bottle by a very, very crafty subversion campaign. This is Stanley Meyer here building his Meyer cells, the ones that I told you could turn Sudan into a lush paradise. This guy was in, what happened was, if you have a free energy invention, this is what I do, there's several organisations you can turn to. Some are more trustworthy than others. Whatever form of free energy or anti-gravity device you have, you can turn to various people who will help you, but don't patent it. Whatever you do, don't patent it. Because if you patent it, you'll get a knock on the door from men in grey suits who will persuade you to maybe sell development rights to their organisation. Firstly, they'll offer you a lot of money, and that's very tempting. A lot of people cave in at that point, because if you're a tinkerer working in your back garden shed, ruining your marriages and squinting away your eyesight, you after all those years of doing it for nothing, having a day job, loathing every moment you spend away from your precious machine, and suddenly someone comes along and says, I'll offer you $10 million for these development rights. Okay? It's very tempting, right, finally it's payday, I'm getting money for this. And so you sell these development rights, you sign the forms without looking at the small print, not realising that they include things such as a non-disclosure agreement, and things like that, and exclusivity and stuff like that to whoever you're signing it for. So the guys in grey suits and the sunglasses, they take the paperwork and they say, thanks very much, we'll be in touch. And you never ever hear from it again. You've lost your machine. You've just given your machine away, your precious invention, to these people who will just put it on the shelf and never develop it. And no one's ever going to see it. There's nothing you can do about it because you signed it over to them. If you refuse to accept payment, then the threats, if the carrot doesn't work, then comes out the stick. They'll threaten your life in various different ways, lives of your family. They may dig up something from your past, something you don't want your wife to know about. Hey guys, come on. I bet you've got a few skeletons in your closet there, haven't you? Well, they'll do their homework and they'll dig that up and they'll say, you know, if you're not willing to sell these development rights to us, maybe your wife should be informed of your little secret. There's all kinds of methods they use. With Stanley Meyer, he actually went to a business dinner in a restaurant with somebody, and he ran out into the street clutching his throat, yelling, "They've poisoned me, they've poisoned me, they've killed me," and he dies. And no one ever hears from the Stanley Meyer cell again. He was actually, the people he were meeting were actually people from DARPA, the Department of Advanced Research Project Agency, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. Another guy called Eugene Maloff suffered a similar fate. Someone else called Bruce De Palma. Bruce De Palma had a free energy invention. He fell off a train drunk, so he got tanked up on the old duty free, and he somehow managed to get the door open and fall out of the train. Yeah, very likely. They've all people in this position have come under misfortune. They've ended up in jail. They've ended up dead. It's John Keeley. There's a whole list of free energy inventors who are either dead or destitute or jailed for various things. They've been framed for criminal offences. This cover-up takes many different forms, and in order to break through this secrecy, it's going to take a lot of very, very careful kind of strategic understanding of the game being played against us. Yeah. Funnily enough, Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut, he actually warned Bruce De Palma shortly before he died that his life was in danger. How did Ed Mitchell know? Strange, isn't it? And there's another dark side to it. This is another part of the free energy issue, which is its dark side. When they take these free energy inventions from you, whether they sell them or or threaten you to give them up, or bribe you to give them up, or blackmail you, whatever method they choose, they don't just put them on the shelf and sit on them. They use them for their own ends. This elite group, this breakaway civilization, as Richard Dolan calls them, they use them for their own nefarious ends. And one of those is weapons. This free energy techniques, these free energy inventions have been turned, at least one of them has been turned into a weapon. This is Dr. Judy Wood, who's worked closely with John Hutchison, and she has provided irrefutable evidence that a weapon devised by, let me just close that a minute, a weapon devised by the methods discovered by John Hutchison was used to destroy the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. We see here, this is one of the supporting columns of the World Trade Center, and this pinnacle here, as it's known, is around about 700 feet high, and it should have fallen over and taken out a city block, but instead it collapses. You see it collapse. Well, maybe collapse is the wrong word. It doesn't collapse. It turns into dust. Look, it turns into dust in midair. These same properties were observed by John Hutchison in his laboratory. He turned things into dust. I do recommend Where Did the Towers Go, the book by Dr. Judy Wood. Any lectures by Dr. Judy Wood or Andrew Johnson, where we explain this in more detail. Now I'm going to have to take a little break because I need to visit the little boys' room. Something I wouldn't be able to do if I was in the marquee right now, obviously, but talk amongst yourselves, go out for some fresh air, take a dip in the River Dee. I'll be back in a few minutes. Right, I'm back. Did you have fun? Now, this is a very, very strange thing. This is a screen over of a TV program, a very brief TV program. The TV program itself is not available anymore, but it's a Russian TV documentary, and it was basically filmed off screen with a camera, just pointing at the screen, a bit like what we are now. And this device here is some kind of aircraft. It's filmed flying around like a platform with a pilot standing on it, controlling it. Now, this is very, very similar to in terms of its properties, to a flying machine invented by someone called Viktor Grebennikov. Viktor Grebennikov lived in the 1950s, and he invented a levitating platform using an anti-gravity method. And basically the government, which was the Soviet Union at the time, tried to take it from him. They tried to take it away from him. Now he, according to the story, he destroyed the machine and all his papers rather than give it up to the Soviet authorities. But they may well have captured him and tortured him or something and made him give it up. But anyway, I've got reason to believe that this possibly is a device. This flying machine, this aircraft, has been developed, and it's a more recent version of Viktor Grebennikov's device. Now, the reason I think that is this is we're told that technically, there's been some commentary on this. Technically, this is powered by a turbojet. There's basically a turbojet pointing downwards, and that's how it achieves lift. It's basically the jet engine is actually propelling this platform and the pilot up into the air. However, if you watch the video, it's on YouTube. Just put in I don't know what you search for it with, but you'll find it. You'll see it flying very low over meadows full of long grass and through a forest quite low above treetops. You'll see it lifting off from a lorry where there's people standing by it, and there's no disturbance of the air which you get from a jet engine. If this was really a jet engine pointing downwards, a turbojet powerful enough to push this thing up into the air, then the grass underneath it would be disturbed, as would the treetops as this was flowing through it. There'd be wind coming from underneath this craft, and the guys on the lorry, the guys on the back of the truck rather, supporting this thing or guiding it as it lifts up into the air, their trouser legs will be whipped around by the breeze. But you don't see that, which leads me to believe that the lift is actually, and propulsion is actually, some kind of anti-gravity device. Very, very interesting indeed. Right, free energy has been developed already in two very, very disparate places across the world. One of them is in India. A guy called Peshawara Tawari, who works for an Indian energy company, has developed a free energy device, but he's not being allowed to use it. Okay. In Shetland, off the north of Scotland, a guy called Stuart Hill, He's part of the Shetland independence movement. He's a friend of mine, actually. I've interviewed him on my radio show. He has his own device for generating free energy. There's a long story here, but you check those guys out and just see the progress is being made of this all the time. It's happening. It's happening. It's being done. It's just we don't hear about it because, as you said, JP Morgan and the others with their media, they destroyed Tesla with the media that they control. They're doing the same now to modern day free energy inventors. Now, I bet you're asking, Ben, your talk is called Energy, Politics and UFOs. Well, where the hell, when did UFOs come into it? You mentioned UFOs at the beginning, and you're not mentioning them now. Why is that, Ben? So how do UFOs fit into all this? Energy policy, with the energy policy. What have UFOs got to do it? Well, it's very simple. If UFOs are travelling from through interdimensional portals or from distant galaxies, they're not doing it on Texaco unleaded 4-star, are they? They must be using some form of free energy or anti-gravity propulsion system of a type that they developed in their world, which is not freely available to us in our world. And I think about it is, these things sometimes come down on the Earth's surface. This is a newspaper headline from July the 8th, 1947, of the Roswell Daily Record, of the local newspaper in Roswell, New Mexico. And it reports the capture of a flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region. I've done an entire talk on this, which you can see. It's a few videos ago now, but I held an event in Oxford called Roswell 70, because it's the 70th anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And there's some videos there you can watch all about that, which talks about this in more detail. But basically these things sometimes crash to the Earth. The Roswell incident was not the only one of its kind. It's one of many that have happened, certainly through the 20th century. It wasn't even the first, there was some beforehand. Now, the UFOs, well, firstly, this again, the government is saying that UFOs are not real. I mean, look, this is, if you want to know about energy, any energy report in the news, okay, it's done with great seriousness and great gravity. Energy, yes, we're talking about energy and things like that, and this is all very important, you know, so we're going to treat it very seriously. What's your average UFO mainstream media report? It's this. This is how the mainstream media treats UFOs. Okay, slight difference, isn't it? They make a joke out of it. Official ridicule and denial. That's a quote actually from a document that came out in 1947, shortly after Roswell. And Peter Robbins has looked into this in great detail. So UFOs are covered up. They don't have to be suppressed. They just make people laugh at them and no one takes them seriously. But then if UFOs are crashing to the Earth's surface, what do? I mean, if as that newspaper headline showed, a flying saucer was really captured on a ranch near Roswell, well, people would know about them. We'd know they were real, wouldn't we? Which is why the government keeps it quiet. And there may be many reasons why the government keeps it quiet in terms of socio-political, economic, psychological, cultural reasons. I talk about that in my lecture back then. But one of the reasons, I think, has to be because, in a sense, if we knew UFOs were crashing, if a UFO crashed and we knew about it, then we want to know how it worked. Engineers and scientists would want to examine it, and we find out that it was basically run on free energy and anti-gravity, and that would be essentially another way in which the cover-up failed. So this is one of the main reason, I think, why they keep it quiet. They keep UFOs quiet as well. And there's the disclosure movement. Time for Truth. This is an event which happened in 2014. 2009. With some, these are people part of what's known as exopolitics, the disclosure movement. That's Brian O'Leary, he was an Apollo astronaut. Dr. Stephen Greer, Michael Salla, Travis Walton. Travis Walton was a UFO witness. He was abducted very famously. Robert Dean, Alfred Weber, Stephen Bassett. He's a friend of mine, Stephen Bassett. Nick Pope, the ubiquitous Nick Pope, and Paola Harris. These are good people. I respect them. I respect what they do. I respect what they're doing. This is Stephen Bassett here at the National Press Club during the 2013 Citizens' Hearing on the ET Disclosure. There's Richard Dolan there. A couple of other people. That's Grant Cameron there. Now, this is what I've done an entire video on this, but I mean, the whole idea of disclosure is very simple. The governments admit the truth about UFOs. They admit that there is an extraterrestrial intelligence engaging the human race. They just say that's it. Takes a few seconds, and then it's over. The secret's out the bag. Now, this is where I'm very, very split, because Steve's a good friend, like I said. I respect what he and these others do. But how realistic are they being? Can the government really, considering the nature of what is at stake, which I don't think Steve quite appreciates, the scale of what is at stake relating to energy and things like that, which I've talked about. Can the government really come up and say, and stand on a stage and say, well, yep, UFOs are real. They're powered by free energy, and we thought you'd like to know. We've known about it for a long time. We've known about it for over 70 years, and we didn't tell you. Sorry. We'll make it up to you. We'll bring back school milk. And things like that. I mean, again, it's not just the nature of the secret that's been kept. It's the fact that the secret was kept. There's no way they could spin this. I mean, the political structures of this world do not have the capacity to absorb a revelation of this magnitude. I mean, the papers go crazy over MPs' expenses and duck ponds and blowjobs in the Oval Office, excuse my language. Are they really going to... Oh, it's I've got a book here actually, and I'm just rereading it now. I've read it before, but I'm reading it again. It goes into this in detail. AD After Disclosure by Richard Dolan and Bryce Sable. Very interesting book. That's Richard Dolan there, one of the authors, and it sort of goes into this whole area of the feasibility of willing disclosure. Willing disclosure being that. Well, disclosure will happen, but I get the feeling that real disclosure will be people like us walking, going down Groom Lake Road in vast numbers and breaking into the Area 51. That will be disclosure. I don't think it'll be the government admitting it, because how can they admit it? How can they possibly reveal something that will essentially be so suicidal to all their plans and their status quo? And a world of free energy, from their perspective, a world with, well, never mind the UFO secret, just free energy, because we're talking about things that, this is the next domino that will fall after UFOs, will be, well, what about the Tesla? What about these people? What about Tesla? Tesla had papers declassified 50 years before Roswell because of the free energy invented. In 1897 he carried out an experiment in California where he put rods up into the sky from hilltops and generated a current. When he tried to publish this, the papers were classified. When Tesla died in 1943, a penniless, broken man in a hotel room, and even before the undertakers were allowed in to take his body away to the funeral home, the FBI sealed off the room and they confiscated everything Tesla had, all his books, all his papers, all his prototypes, the lot. This cover-up has a long history, and its existence is foundational to the world order. I mean, from these people will be terrified. I mean, in the world of free energy, from their perspective, it's not just Shell Oil going out of business. It's geopolitical. I mean, the current energy politics of the world is what maintains, say, the disparity between the West and the Third World. That would disappear in a free energy economy. India and China, they would dominate the world with their huge populations and massive resources. The United States is already declining as a superpower. It would become a third-rate nation in no time. It wouldn't be, obviously, from our point of view, from the point of view of the proles, it would make no difference. Ordinary Americans could live much better lives, actually. But from the point of view of the geopolitical manipulators, this would be disastrous. So they have all kinds of motives for keeping this quiet. On the other hand, what if I'm wrong? What if Stephen Bassett is right? Wouldn't that be wonderful? There's nothing more I'd like to be proved wrong on. There really is not. What if it is somehow I've missed something and willing disclosure is possible? My goodness me. I've written a book about that. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Occasionally something happens which does make me wonder. Now I'm going to tell you a little story about something that happened to me a couple of years ago. I was invited by my friend Dave Hodrian, who is a UFO lecturer. He lectures on UFO subjects. Was invited to attend an event called the Roswell 1947 UFO Research Lecture. Roswell Revisited by David Hodrian. And there's the address, number 4, St James's Square, London. It was hosted by something called the Light Modulation Company, lightmodulation.com. Okay, their company, Light Modulation Limited. It's basically like they provide IMAX displays. You go in and there's a display of, it's like a tent, a huge tent, and it has like this dome-shaped thing like the planetarium in London, and it displays things on there. Now, when I turned up, I couldn't believe it. This place is the poshest, grandest. It's like all these London townhouses, but it's actually the home of something called the In and Out Club, which is a very, very elite, society in London. And when I turned up, see, I turned up at their front door, and it was this grand, ornate oak thing. And I turned up with Heidi, a female friend of mine, and they as soon as I got to reception, they said, "You can't come in, sir, because firstly you're not dressed right. I have to have a shirt and tie. You have to have a shirt and tie to go into the In and Out Club. Also, no ladies. It's a gentleman's club only. So Heidi couldn't come in because she's a woman. It's a men only club." So I negotiated with this guy. I said, "Look, we come all the way from London. I've been invited." And he said, "Oh, well, in the end, we had to go in through the back entrance. And there's this sort of like kitchen, and there's this gym, and it's the grandest place imaginable." And so I sat there, I was thinking, well, okay, this is a UFO event, so sooner or later I'm going to run into my old mates from the UFO conference circuit and things like that. But anyway, when the guests did turn up, these were guys in mohair suits, right, with gold Rolex watches. Their wives had fur coats with diamond earrings and bracelets. And I was listening to them talking, and they were saying, I overheard their conversation, and these were elite people. They were saying things like, well, latest figures from our Hong Kong office are very encouraging, and things like that. And I got talking to a couple of guys, and they were nice people. I got talking to one guy who was like a top engineer. He's an Australian guy, and he was a member of the club, and he asked me about UFOs and things like that. And apparently, but this place is really, really posh, and Prince Charles is a member. I got into a club in which Prince Charles, I had to go in through the kitchen. But me and Heidi, we got into this club, and because it was a private event, I was allowed to go in dressed like a scruff bag with a lady. But otherwise I wouldn't have been allowed in. But this is incredible. And what's more, what's really weird is like, it's really quite incredible. This actually happened. Was this some sort of this covert promotional disclosure? The thing. I talked to Steve about this, and Steve Bassett. He thinks so. He's actually got in touch with the organisers over this, and he says, "Look, this is really, really weird." It was like a pageant. There was like this guy dressed up as an alien and things like that. But like I say, the people going along were like really, really posh. They were grand people, and they sat watching Dave do this lecture on Roswell and the UFOs, and I was sitting there, and Dave's face was like Dave was as shocked as I was at the place that he turned up at. He couldn't believe it either, and to this day he's still baffled by it all. So was this so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are movements within the elite circles that are going towards disclosure. Maybe these are some of the people that Steve has been dealing with, because Steve has been talking to congressmen and women. He's come over to Britain and talked to a couple of MPs. He's done speeches. Maybe this is a kind of like, maybe there is a kind of disclosure movement within the elite circles. My head tells me no, but my heart tells me maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe things like this. Inadvertently, I blundered. I gate crashed almost into this event, which was part of this disclosure promotion thing. The reason this is so important is because of where the world is heading right now, and why the time we're living in now. It's, in a sense, it's a shitty deal, isn't it? Because we were born too late to explore the world. We were born too early to explore space. But instead, we just have the job of saving the planet from these elite New World Order Illuminati destroyers. So that's it. That's our mission in life. Because this is where we're heading. We're heading for a big brother state, where everything is controlled from a centralised source by covert one world government, where individual people are nothing more than cogs in machines, cogs which are disposable and can be replaced and thrown away and in no time at all. That's where we're heading. That's what the elite want. That the trends in society, every single thing that happens in global politics, almost everything, with few exceptions like Brexit and Trump, etc., which I've talked about before, the general trend in politics today is towards greater authoritarianism, greater centralisation, greater internationalism. We may be looking at a world in which the biosphere is destroyed or modified beyond recognition. Maybe maybe the environmental destruction is part of the plan. Maybe they want it deliberately. It's not just a byproduct of their pathological political control, but it is a part of what they want. And this is why we're using fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are such an effective environmental destroyer. I don't know how much of that you can see, but that's a destroyed world. That's a devastated world, which is where we're heading right now, unless we turn the ship around. The ship. It's interesting, isn't it, that ship analogy? Because I just thought I did remember that, yeah. Because what Pendy Lincoln and Soren Renner say, you know, about the ship going down and the guys in the lifeboats with the axe. You need to ask this question, all right? Because this is the fact of the matter. We won't be able to escape this. If we end up in a lifeboat hacking at people's hands with axes, all right, we will have no other. The scenario will be this, that the captain of the ship was never sinking at all. The ship was scuttled by the captain. The captain did it on purpose so he could push people into the water, to kill the majority of them by drowning, and the minority left alive he could then put in a lifeboat, where he could then run a much tighter ship from now on in that lifeboat. And we will have to face the fact that the only reason we ended up in our lifeboat hacking at people's hands with axes is because we were tricked into it. None of it was necessary. All of it was preventable. We could live in this kind of world where we have everything that's good about modern civilization, technology, abundance and things like that, but living in harmony with nature, where the natural world would be free to exist as itself, in a natural way, and we could live in a high technological city with views like this, just outside our door. With free energy, we could do it. As I said, this is going to end cheerfully. Don't give up. That's what I'm saying is, don't ever give up. Gandalf, character created by J.R. Tolkien. Tolkien was actually a genius. Tolkien was very, very much in touch with very deep spiritual currents in the world. And the Lord of the Rings is actually a product of, I think, his almost channeled information. Gandalf said, "Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I found. I found that it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love." What Gandalf is saying is none of us are helpless. All of us can contribute and change the world. All of us. This monolithic power structure that's keeping free energy from us, keeping UFOs secret, it's a house of cards in reality. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. It is a monolithic bluff that exists because we don't exercise our power in pulling out the cards and making it fall. Martin Luther King said, "This hour in history needs a dedicated circle of transformed non-conformists. Our planet teeters on the brink of annihilation. Dangerous passions of pride, hatred and selfishness are enthroned in our lives, and men do reverence before false gods of nationalism and materialism. The saving of our world from pending doom will come not through the complacent adjustment of the conforming majority, but through the creative maladjustment of a non-conforming minority." A minority? What can a minority do? Well, this guy, Lyle Watson, he explained what a minority can do, because he's a scientist from South Africa, and he did something really amazing. He discovered something which essentially is proof of Carl Jung's collective unconscious. He did experiments with monkeys. He observed monkeys on an island, and a monkey would learn how to do a new trick. In the case of Watson, he was watching it, and he was watching these monkeys, and one of the monkeys learned how to wash these potatoes, because they used to dig up potatoes and eat them. One monkey learned how to wash them in the sea before eating them, which improved the flavour because it made them salty. And a couple of other monkeys watched him doing that, and I thought, I'll have a go. So they tried to do the same, and they realised it worked. And bit by bit, one by one, the monkeys gradually learned how to wash potatoes in the sea to make them taste better. And now normally this knowledge would spread slowly through the population as more and more monkeys learned, and it would increase exponentially, but it would increase at a certain rate. Lyle Watson discovered that the rate of increase did not run in a smooth exponential curve, but instead it went like that, and then suddenly it went shot up. Almost instantly, all the monkeys knew how to do it as soon as a certain critical mass was reached. That certain critical mass, it seemed that it was almost like a threshold was crossed by which the knowledge of these small group of monkeys was instantly transmitted to the collective unconscious, from which all the monkeys in that species could learn from it. These are even monkeys on other islands that had no physical contact with the monkeys who first learned the trick. Lyle Watson worked out that it was roughly 1% of the monkeys was all it took for this knowledge to be instantly transferred to the collective unconscious. This is where you get the phrase 100th monkey effect. Now, humans are very closely related to monkeys. We're primates. This means that you don't need to convince the majority of people of what I'm saying here. You just need to convince a certain amount, a threshold figure. And once you do that, then boom, everything explodes. It explodes into the general population. And you've got to have a sense of humour in this world, you really do, otherwise it'll just get you down. So you have to have a laugh. As Oscar Wilde said, always forgive your enemies because nothing annoys them so much. Have a sense of humour, as he also said. Brilliant man was Oscar Wilde. Life is too important to be taken seriously. You've got to be able. If you don't laugh and have a joke about this, it'll drive you crazy. I've known people who've been driven round the bend. They've been driven to despair as a result of the grim situation we're in. But it's not as grim as it seems. It really is not. Mahatma Gandhi talks all about despair, about what happens when you despair. When I despair, I remember that all through history the ways of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end they always fall. Think of it, always. Gandhi said he also said that there's a moral arc which bends towards justice, which means basically we are on the winning team. We are going with the natural flow. It's the keepers of the secret that are going against the flow, which is why they inevitably they will be defeated. He's absolutely right. So what can you do? Well, do you recognise this? That is Mount Everest. It's the tallest mountain in the world. Now, who climbed Mount Everest first? Well, when mountains are first climbed, the name of the first climber who gets to the top is always marked in the history books. And with most climbers, with most mountains, it's one name. Because even a team of climbers will select, they'll draw lots or something, or they'll select one individual within that team to actually climb, to take the historic first step onto the top of a mountain. Now, the team which climbed Mount Everest for the first time in 1955 was led by two men, Sir Edmund Hillary, a New Zealander, and Tenzing Norgay, who was a local man from the Sherpa culture. They both climbed Everest first. What happened was they decided to share the honour of being the first people to climb the Everest. They held hands and they stepped onto the summit together at the very top of the mountain. However, when they got back to base camp, the expedition sponsors handed around some forms for people to sign. Tenzing was given a form to sign, and he said, "Tenzing, sign this for you, Willie. It's just some administrative red tape. So we just need your signature on here just to sort of like clear a couple of things up." And Norgay, he signed the form. The problem is Norgay couldn't read English. He could speak English, but he couldn't read it. He could only read his own language, and the form wasn't in his language; it was in English. This is where the expedition sponsors tricked Norgay, because what they wanted, it was very, very important from their point of view, from publicity, that Sir Edmund Hillary was the single sole first climber of Mount Everest, and Norgay came up second. So they tricked Norgay into admitting, because what this form actually said was, "I, Tenzing Norgay, saw Sir Edmund Hillary step onto the summit of Mount Everest ahead of me before I did, making him the first man to climb Mount Everest, and I was only second. They tricked him into falsely claiming that Hillary had gone first. So the expedition sponsors had it in the bag. Hillary, first man climbed. But they needed Hillary's cooperation. They needed him to go along to it. So they approached Sir Edmund Hillary and they said, Ed, look, we got it in the bag for you, mate. Don't worry about sharing the honour with Norgay. Your name alone is going down in the history books because we've tricked him. We got him to sign this form, the stupid fool, admitting that he saw you go first. You and you alone are going to be the great one. So what did Hillary do? He could have taken advantage of that situation and gone and collaborated. He could have collaborated with the sponsors in their successful scam. But you know what? He wouldn't do it. He refused to betray his friend Tenzing Norgay, and he was furious. He kicked up hell about it, and he backed him up. He said, "This is nonsense. You've tricked him." He and I stepped onto that mountain together, holding hands as good friends, and that's the truth. But we're going to share this honour. It's an old-fashioned notion, isn't it, nowadays, isn't it? It's considered naive. People like Hillary, what Hillary did, they're considered sort of like naive old obscurantists, aren't they? You know, people who actually believe in honour and principles and fair play. You know, they're losers. They don't go very far in life. It's the others. It's the crafty dog-eat-dog guys. They're the ones who win. No. If we're going to get out of this mess, and we're going to live in a free world with free energy and anti-gravity, in the knowledge that we're not alone in this universe, and we're a part of a massive community in a living universe, then we're going to need people who have the guts and the decency to do what Edmund Hillary did. We need you in that situation to do the same as what Hillary did. And that's me. If you want to know more about me, just go to www.hapanwo.blogspot.com. That's my website, and as I said, I'm working on a new article actually for the main site, but there's like a lot more. There's a lot more I can do, and there's a lot of kind of additional stuff that I can. There's a lot of stuff. There's like the news site which I update every day if I can, and there's like the videos on YouTube channel. That's Hapanwo TV, which you're watching right now. There's my radio show, Hapanwo Radio. There's the fiction blog. There's the forum. On the subject of fiction, I've written a book. It's this one. It's called Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. There's me, see, Ben Allen Jones. And there's the blurb there. See, on July of 1947, an artifact of extraterrestrial origin crashed to Earth's surface near Roswell, New Mexico, USA. The government sealed off the area and secretly salvaged the object. They lied to the public, providing a fake story that all that crashed was a weather balloon. This cover-up is maintained to this day. But what if that cover-up never happened? Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, explores the fictional what if. Explores a fictional alternative history in which we, the people, discovered from the outset that we were not alone. This is my novel. I'm writing a sequel to this at the moment, actually. It should be ready soon. I was hoping to be able to sell some to you guys if I was there, and I can't because I'm not there. But you can order it online. Okay, you can order it from there. So that's my talk, and I'm really sorry I'm not with you. I'm really sorry. I'm going to miss meeting up with you guys again, very much indeed. It's a bug. It's my leg. I can't walk for it properly. I just can't walk properly, and it's just painful to walk and stuff like that. I'm going to be off work probably for a week or so as well. And it's just a bug that it happened to happen now. I'm so sorry. But I hope you have a really great time. You have a wonderful weekend. Have a swim in the river. Sing and dance around the fire like we did last year. Enjoy the view. And take a ride on the steam train. And all those other things that I wish I was there doing with you right now. I really do. And hopefully next year I'll be able to join you. And everything will be fine. In the meantime, have a great conscious tribal gathering, all of you. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.